Chapter 568. A Yuanying Jinren died in front of her eyes. Hundreds of years of cultivation dissipated in an instant. Lu Meinyang couldn't help but be distracted and was nearly caught by a gray smoke ring that was hard to discern by the naked eye. Luckily, her reactions were quick and she was a demonic cultivator. She could change her form and instantly turned into a white feathered heron. She flapped her wings and flew away. The rope tightened and caught nothing. Elder Shun sighed and sent out a talisman which shone with a faint spiritual light to protect Taoist Su's origin spirit. At this moment, they were still in the demonic clouds and there was a strong enemy in front of them. He had no time to go over to protect them. Seeing that they were on the same path, he could only do this much. After the upper half of the body of the demon sect elder that Taoist Su killed fell down, a light smoke flew out from his nose. It was his origin spirit that escaped. The cultivators of the devil sect were different from the disciples of Xianmen. Even if their bodies were destroyed, their primordial spirit could still fly around. If they could find the body of a fellow cultivator of the devil sect in time, they could rely on a secret technique to survive. Even if their cultivation was not as good as before, they could slowly find a way to cultivate it back. However, there was still Zhang Boyun, an elder of the demon sect who knew the ins and outs of the situation. He had long since come to take a look. To him, the origin spirit of a demon sect cultivator was a great supplement. When he saw the origin spirit, he laughed coldly. The cloud above his head shook and a demon was released, flying off to chase. The origin spirit didn't get far before it was caught by the demon and swallowed in 2 to 3 mouthfuls. It then turned around and ate the 2 pieces of the body. After Zhang Yan killed the white-haired old Taoist priest, another elder of the Jiuling sect came forth to exchange blows with him. As such, he could not afford to be distracted. When he heard Lu Meinyang's exclamation, a cold glint flashed past his eyes. He hollered and a bolt of purple cloud thunder struck out, forcing the elder away. He turned around and saw that Taoist Su was actually dead. He sighed in his heart and stretched out his hand to summon the legacy talisman. He held it in his hand and said seriously, "Fellow Taoist, you came to protect me, but you died because of me. You should focus on protecting your soul first. I will definitely give you an explanation in the future." The elder of the devil doctrine saw that he seemed to be distracted and was unwilling to miss such a good opportunity. He waved his sleeve and a silver awl flew over. Halfway through, a golden leaf flew over and blocked it, and a golden light hung down like a curtain. The elder shook his body, and 3 jade-colored axes shot out from the cloud above him. When it got close, it actually changed between illusion and reality. It first turned into a faint shadow light, passing through the golden curtain of light, and then condensed into a solid form, all hitting Zhang Yan's body. Only 3 dang-dang-dang sounds were heard, but before they could reach Zhang Yan's body, they were bounced off by a beam of light rising from his robe. Zhang Yan didn't even raise his head. He flicked his sleeves and the water under his feet surged. When the wave came up, it swept the 3 jade axes into it. The elder summoned a few times, but only the silver awl returned. The jade axes didn't respond at all, and he couldn't help but reveal a shocked expression. Zhang Yan kept the talisman calmly, and only then did he raise his eyes to look at him. His gaze was slightly cold. The 5-colored cloud above him suddenly rotated, and suddenly a red light appeared. It was bright red like the sunset, and fierce like fire. At the same time, the sword pellet floating beside him suddenly turned into light and flew over, attacking together. The elder's expression turned cold. He had already seen the death of his fellow disciple, and knew that this light was unusual. He didn't dare to block it, but in the dragon carp's heaven and earth confinement technique, it wasn't easy for him to escape. Thus, he could only plan a countermeasure on the spot. He let out a loud roar. The cloud above him rose, and an exquisite jade token flew up. However, it had only risen half a foot high when a spot of clear light flew over and fixed it in place, rendering it unable to move anymore. That red light brushed over and sliced off the treasured light protecting his body. The sword pellet took the opportunity to attack, and with a flash of sharp light, it had already sliced him into 2. The sword light circled once more on the spot, and before his origin spirit could escape, It was shredded into pieces. The method that Zhang Yan used to kill this elder was exactly the same as the previous time. However, it was this single move that was used consecutively. The Dharma treasures, Tao techniques, and flying swords were closely linked, and the two elders of Jiuling's sect couldn't defend against it. Although the dragon carp's heaven and earth confinement technique was used, causing the two elders of Jiuling's sect to be unable to move, Zhang Yan had many tricks up his sleeves, and there was no lack of ways to restrict his opponents on the spot. Therefore, even if he were to face his opponents alone, he had a high chance of killing them. At another place, Zhang Boyan had just now released the devil head to devour that origin spirit, causing the two elders of Jiuling's sect to be enraged, and they came to attack him together. One of them shouted, "Look at your actions. Since you're from the Netherworld Spring sect, how can you help someone from the Celestial sect? Could it be that you're thinking of deceiving your master and destroying your ancestors?" Zhang Boyan laughed maniacally, saying, "Wang Qianli, Lu Zhiqi, you two old fogies, losers. Are you even fit to lecture this old man?" The two elders of Jiuling were taken aback when their identities were exposed with a single shout. Bewilderment appeared in their eyes as they said, "You are..." There was no way Zhang Boyan would be willing to waste his breath on them. Scoffing coldly, he reached out with his hand and took out a banner. He placed it on the Dharma cloud beneath his feet and cast a spell, using the sun-shrouding dark clouds technique. In a split second, sinister winds blew in all directions, and black clouds rumbled. Countless withered demonic hands reached out from within, grabbing hold of all the devil spirits in the surroundings and dragging them in with all their might. Under the heaven and earth confinement lock, many of the devil spirits were already unable to move very well. Now that they were being grabbed and pulled, they found it even harder to move. This technique wasn't a divine ability. However, it was exceptionally useful to be executed within the devil clouds at this moment. Outsiders were completely unable to tell where it was coming from. Even the two elders of Jiuling's sect were flustered as they hurriedly brought out their Dharma treasures and protective treasures to protect themselves. When Zhang Boyan saw the pathetic state the two of them were in, a look of mockery appeared in his eyes as if he was toying with his prey. With a roar, his body shook, and 108 ferocious devil heads flew out in all directions. They were like flies that had smelled blood, and when they saw the two of them, they rushed over and started biting them. After a short while, the Dharma treasures of the two of them were bitten to shreds. The spiritual light on their Dharma treasures faded, and they turned into a pile of junk. The two of them were panic-stricken as they hurriedly brought out another Dharma treasure each and brought it up in the air. However, they didn't manage to hold out for long before they were destroyed once more. After a few rounds of this, the Dharma treasures of the two of them were completely bitten away, and only their protective treasures remained. Zhang Boyan laughed coldly. The two of them were trapped where they were and couldn't move at all. No matter how much they struggled, it was useless. All they were doing was delaying their deaths for a moment. After waiting for a short while more, the protective treasures of the two of them finally shattered. Hundreds of devil heads swarmed over, tearing their corpses apart and devouring them. Zhang Boyan swept his gaze around and activated the Yellow Springs escape art. His body turned into a wisp of smoke and flew over. At the same time, he let out a long howl, and the hundreds of devil heads followed him. They circled around the area once and devoured all the flesh and blood of the devil spirits into their bodies. There were a total of 6 elders of Jiuling's sect who had come this time around. Right now, 5 of them had already been killed, and there was only one left who was still fighting against Lu Mainyang. Even though Lu Mainyang didn't have any overly powerful utmost treasures on her, and her mystic arts were ordinary as well, she had very few flaws. Because she was using guerrilla fighting techniques, she would escape in time every time she sensed danger approaching. As such, the elder of Devil Sect who was fighting against her couldn't take her down at all. Seeing his fellow sect members dying one after another, this person knew that he couldn't escape due to the heaven and earth imprisonment art. He thought about it and made up his mind. He took out a Dharma art and activated the mystic art of Jiuling's sect, Mutual Destruction. Elder Shen saw that Lu Mainyang was still able to deal with the situation earlier on, and therefore didn't head up to help her. Instead, he stood guard at the side, taking note of whether there were any other devil sect cultivators hiding nearby. At this moment, he saw that the expression of the elder of Jiuling's sect had changed. With his experience, he knew that something was wrong. With a jerk of his hand, he sent out a sword talisman. However, when the sword talisman reached the elder, the Dharma treasure on his body flew out to protect him. With a loud boom, it clashed against the sword talisman. When Elder Shin saw that the sword talisman was blocked, he felt that things were going to be bad. But just at this moment, 2 streaks of light, 1 gold and 1 red, flew over like lightning. Be it Elder Shin, Lu Mainyang or Old Demon Zhang, all 3 of them felt their vision blur. When they looked over again, they saw that the last elder of Jiuling's sect had already been decapitated, dead on the spot. All of them were shocked. Turning their heads over, they saw that Zhang Yan's expression was calm, standing there with his hands behind his back. 5 colored lights surrounded him, making it so that they couldn't look at him directly. Zhang Yan nodded to the 3 of them and took the lead to ride the dragon carp towards the extreme skies. The 3 of them exchanged glances and followed behind him. It didn't take long before the skies brightened up. They had already charged out of the demonic clouds. Zhang Yan raised his head and saw that there were astral clouds swirling above the skies. Within them, there was a huge vortex. Standing there, he could already see the star stone clearly. The astral winds that were emitted from the countless orifices of the star stone would occasionally blow past, causing the protective treasure light around him to flicker. At this moment, his expression changed. Looking back, he saw that Huoxian and the others had also escaped from the demonic clouds. Originally, there were 13 Yuanying cultivators from Qinsong School. But now, there were only 5 of them left. Other than Huoxian, Luo Qingyu and Zhong Muqing, only Elder Chen and 1 disciple of Zhenren Yen were left. The 3 disciples of Zhenren Qin who came with Zhong Muqing were nowhere to be seen. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't expect that in such a short period of time, the Qinsong School would lose 8 Yuanying elders. The situation of the battle was actually so tragic. However, the price that the 6 sects of demon sects had to pay wouldn't be any less. Seeing that he was here, Huoxian cupped his hands from afar. Without saying anything, he, Zhong and Luo each unfolded their talismans and turned into a ray of clear light to protect themselves. Then, they turned into a ray of light and flew towards the astral clouds. In an instant, they had ascended to the extreme skies. After watching the 3 of them leave, Elder Chen looked down and hesitated for a while. He didn't go down to the demonic clouds. He called out to the disciple of Zhenren Yen and flew away. After the Qinsong School left, there was another surge in the clouds below. This time, it was the people from Yuxiao School who broke out. However, they were even more miserable. Originally, there were 12 Yuanying cultivators from Yuxiao sect. Because Zhou Qingyun was killed by Zhang Yan, there were only 12 people left. But now, apart from Zhou Huang and Xie Keming, there were only 2 elders following behind them. Zhou Huang also glanced at Zhang Yan, but he pretended not to see it. Only Xie Keming glared at him. The 2 people seemed to have no intention to delay here. They raised the talismans and turned into a ray of light, piercing into the extreme skies and disappeared in the blink of an eye. And the 2 Yuxiao elders, like Elder Chen, also avoided the demonic clouds. They chose to take a detour and flew to other places on the conveyance light. Zhang Yan looked at the star stone on the top of the sky. His eyes flickered slightly. He pondered for a moment and suddenly said, "Go back." Elder Shen was stunned and asked in surprise, "Not going to the extreme skies?" Zhang Yan shook his sleeves and shouted coldly, "The elders of the demonic doctrine killed my disciples. How can we let it go? After the battle with Qinsong and Yuxiao, there are still a few people left, but not many. When I go back, I will kill them all and then go to the extreme skies." Chapter 569. Zhang Yan's tone was filled with murderous intent. Anyone who heard him would be shocked. Elder Shen lowered his head and thought. When the elders of the demon sect flew up from the mountain peak, he paid close attention to them. At a glance, there were about 30 of them. In the battle just now, the Qinsong and Yuxiao sects elders suffered heavy casualties. How could the elders of the demon sect have it easy? They most likely suffered heavy casualties as well. Even if they were lucky enough to survive, they would be exhausted and would not be at their peak. On their side, other than Priest Su's death, the rest of them did not even use much of their mana. They could still fight. Thinking about this, he immediately cupped his hands and said, "Daoren is willing to help." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Elder Shin, I heard that your Guangyuan sect has a total of 5 talisman techniques. One of them is the Talisman of the Gate of Life, which has 4 incantations. They are Search, Lead, Assist, and Repeat. It can be used to find the entrance of a formation and also to track the enemy." Elder Shin replied respectfully, "That is indeed the case. The Search Talisman of the 4 incantations can find the person you are looking for in a sea of people. Jinren, do you want Daoren to find the location of the rest of the demon sect members?" Zhang Yan smiled and nodded, "That is exactly the reason." Elder Shin smiled, "That is easy." Actually, finding people was not an easy task, especially for cultivators who had entered the Taoist realm. Even if one used the talisman technique, one would have to pay a huge price. If one used the talisman technique to find a person, one would need to first get a trace of the person's aura, birth date, and name. Once the person is 1,000 miles away, it would be useless. However, Elder Shin was very sure that if his guess was correct, there should only be the demon sect cultivators left in the demon cloud. Then it would be much easier. All he had to do was find the living person's aura and he would be able to find their whereabouts. That was why he dared to take on such a big task. Elder Shin's expression was solemn. He took out a yellow talisman and threw it in front of him. After chanting a few incantations, he pointed at it and the talisman seemed to have gained spirituality. It flew away and then he sat down with his eyes closed, as if he was searching with his mind. Not long after, he suddenly opened his eyes. He stood up and said in a deep voice, "Jinren, Daoren has found his location." Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, "No hurry." He turned to the side and cupped his hands towards Zhang Boyan. "Zhang will most likely encounter cultivators from your Netherspring sect. It'll be inconvenient for you to meet your fellow sect members, so you can stay here. There's no need to follow us." Cultivators were especially afraid of deceiving their masters and destroying their ancestors. Even if he was Zhang Boyan's disciple, he couldn't force him to deal with his former fellow disciples. Zhang Boyan hurriedly took a step back and returned the greeting, "Mannerhead is magnanimous. Although I can't fight with my fellow disciples, I don't have to worry about other disciples. Moreover, I've already changed my appearance. My old acquaintances won't be able to recognize me. I'm willing to go with you and protect you." Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. He didn't say anything else and turned to Elder Shin. "If I'm not wrong, they should be gathered together." Elder Shin sighed, "Jinren, you're right." Zhang Yan smiled. "If that's the case, we should plan to catch them off guard." He didn't make the decision to go back and kill the Devil Sect elders on impulse. He had a plan in mind. When they were surrounded by the Devil Sect elders, they were on the defensive side and were in a passive position. They could only fight for themselves and couldn't display their full strength. Now that they were on the offensive side, the situation was reversed. After they discussed for a while, Elder Shin took out a talisman from his sleeve and threw it out. He pointed and said, "You just need to follow this talisman and you'll be able to find his location." Zhang Yan smiled and rode the dragon carp down the demonic cloud. He was the first to chase after the talisman. Elder Shin, Zhang, and Lu didn't hesitate and followed. 250 miles to the west, there were a few Devil Sect elders gathered together. They were sitting on a cloud raft that was about an acre in size. However, as Elder Shin had expected, the 6 Devil Sect elders had suffered heavy losses in the battle with the Qinsong and Yuxiao sections. Originally, there had been a total of 32 people, but after the battle, only 6 remained. If it weren't for the fact that their movement techniques were formidable and that each of them had their own means of escape, they probably wouldn't even have survived. Apart from the Netherspring sect, which still had 2 people, the other 4 sects had 1 person from each sect who was still alive. This wasn't a coincidence. After the bodies of people from the same sect died, there needed to be someone to protect their souls and treasures back to the sect, or to send them to reincarnate, or to find a new body. After the battle, the few of them had used up a lot of their mana and were exhausted. They didn't dare to go down the cloud. The elders of Lishan, Taihao, Nenhua, and Yuanyang were not obstructed, so their strength was still intact. In addition to the few remaining elders of Yucang and Yushao, their numbers were far greater than theirs. If they attacked together, they might not be able to withstand the attack. They might even be waiting below. Hence, they decided to meditate in the demonic clouds. After recovering for a while, they would return to the peak together. There was a protective formation there, so they wouldn't be afraid of being attacked. Elder Kim looked at the few people beside him and smiled bitterly. The Tao techniques of Qinsong School and Yuxiao sects are really powerful. A red-clothed old Taoist had a gloomy expression as he interrupted. I never expected that Zhong Muqing would be like Huoxian and cultivate two techniques. Water and wood are born from each other, and he actually cultivated the Shaoyue clear lightning. Many of our techniques were destroyed by it, and 2 junior brothers were caught off guard by it, causing them to lose to this technique. Elder Kim sighed. In this battle, even 2 of his treasures were destroyed, which was why he was able to escape. Elder Qi, however, didn't care at all. He said in a loud voice, "Fellow Taoists, why are you sighing here?" Although many fellow Taoists have gone to this battle, they have delayed the disciples of the 3 sects from reaching the extreme heaven by more than a moment. I believe that the disciples of the 6 sects should have already made arrangements in that item. As long as we obtain the heaven and earth Junyang essence, even if we all die, we will still win. Elder Kim looked around and said hesitantly, "Haven't the Jioling sect friends returned yet?" Elder Qi pondered for a while, then replied, "The journey to intercept the Yao Yin sect and the Guangyuan sect is actually more dangerous than the 2 of us. The others are still fine, but the Dragon Carp Great Demon's cultivation is comparable to a 3rd-tier nascent soul cultivator, and he has the heaven and earth sealing technique. If we can't kill him, it will be hard for us to escape." Elder Kim nodded silently. Jade Yin sect and Guangyuan sect had fewer people, so the outcome of the battle should have been decided long ago. If they didn't arrive now, they would probably be in trouble. The red-robed Daoran comforted, "The disciples of Jioling's sect are different from us. They have many spiritual senses, and even if they die, their souls won't be destroyed. They just need to nourish themselves in the spirit cave and find a core transformation cultivator to kill their guardian spirit. 100 days later, they will find a suitable body to store their souls in. After cultivating for 100 years, they will be able to recover." Beside him, Elder Jean nodded his head in agreement. But he knew that the other party was just saying it. Jioling's sect did have this secret technique, but it was easier said than done. The price they had to pay was far more than that. Even if they succeeded, they would never be able to improve their cultivation. Unless it was an extremely important person, Jioling's sect wouldn't do it. The red-robed Daoran wanted to say something, but he suddenly felt a huge force pressing down on his body. It was as if he was trapped in an invisible cage. His expression changed, and a magic treasure that looked like a compass flew up and blocked in front of him. A talisman with sword light flew over and hit the magic treasure. The 2 items collided, and the sound of metal clashing rang out. It was so loud that one's eardrums felt like they were going to explode. At the same moment the magic treasure flew up, he had already propped up the protective treasure light on his body. However, the sword talisman wasn't the only thing that followed. First, a strange red light swept up and extinguished the treasure light. He couldn't help but be terrified. He still wanted to struggle, but several tens of lightning bolts that were condensed with enormous Fa-Li had already followed closely and struck his body in an instant. With a rumble, he was instantly blasted to the point that not even his bones remained. The others noticed that something was off at the same time, and they circulated their profound arts yet were actually unable to fly away. They were all elders of a sect after all, so their reactions were swift, and they withdrew their protective magic treasures and treasure lights at the same time. One of the elders seemed to have discovered the direction of the incoming person. He suddenly shouted and summoned a ball of flickering blue flame above his head. He then formed a hand seal and over 100 flying flames flew in that direction. However, halfway there, countless white feathers collided with it and blocked the flying flames. At this moment, a bolt of purple lightning struck down, and the treasure light on his body was instantly shattered. He immediately spat out a mouthful of blood and fell down. A bright light flashed before his eyes, and he suddenly caught a glimpse of a sword light rapidly approaching. He was startled, and he raised his hand to press on his chest. Silver mercury flowed on his clothes, and with a dang sound, he blocked the sword light that was about to reach his neck. Although he was lucky to preserve his life, he was so frightened that he broke out in a cold sweat. After Elder Kim released his magic treasure, he looked around and saw countless talisman papers rising up in the surroundings. Every single talisman paper was about 10 meters tall, and they were like banners. There were seal characters carved on them, and they flickered with golden light. He knew the situation was bad, and if he was trapped on the spot, he would be at the mercy of others. He shouted loudly, "Everyone, follow me and charge out." The others immediately understood what he meant. Although it wasn't easy to fly, if the 5 of them worked together to move the cloud raft beneath their feet, they would be able to charge out. As long as they were more than 50 kilometers away, they would have a chance to escape. They immediately circulated their magic power and did their best to pull the cloud raft up. They had only gone up an arrow's throw when they heard a rumbling sound in the clouds. They looked up in panic, and the black fog above them was like waves that were rolling ceaselessly. They saw a huge hand that was condensed from countless yellow smoke stretching out, and it carried the strength of a mountain as it slammed down from above. Elder Chi shouted loudly and took out a magic treasure. However, a ray of rainbow light fell into the rolling yellow smoke, and like a clay ox entering the sea, it disappeared without a trace. The expressions of the 5 of them changed greatly. They knew that this was a matter of life and death, and they didn't have any time to hesitate. They shouted in unison and circulated all their magic power. The cloud above them spun at the same time, and it suddenly grew to 100 meters in size. It turned into chi and flew up to meet the attack. The sound of mountains splitting suddenly sounded between heaven and earth, and the huge yellow hand collapsed with a loud bang. However, under this attack, the 5 elders of the devil faction suffered from the recoil, and the light from their treasures dissipated. They spat out blood and fell onto the cloud raft. The black cloud seemed to be pushed away by the huge hand, and a handsome Taoist appeared. His sleeves fluttered, and he was riding a carp in the sky. Behind him, the 5-colored light rotated continuously, and he was looking down coldly. He slowly raised his hand and pointed downwards. Within the light, a yellow light and a water light rushed up 10,000 meters, and then fell down at the same time. With a loud bang, it was as if thousands of mountains had collapsed, and the Milky Way had reversed, and it poured down with the momentum of the sky. P.S. Chapter 570. The 5 elders of the devil sect looked at the mountain-moving and sea-draining momentum, and their expressions changed. They simultaneously released the Yuanying from their heads. In an instant, the 5 Yuanying manifested and released a brilliant light in midair. The jade fire devil flame was like a reef in the sea, and they worked together to block the oncoming torrent. After the Yuanying was released, although the power of the Taoist techniques and the defensive power of the body were increased, the consumption of magic power was even greater. If it was broken by someone, it would also damage one's cultivation. Therefore, those who were good at fighting would rarely do this unless they were certain that they could kill the enemy in a short period of time. However, they had to do this at this moment, or else they wouldn't be able to get through this. After doing this, the 5 of them released all the remaining magic treasures in their possession to protect themselves. They cooperated and supported each other. For a time, their defense was impenetrable. No matter if it was the lightning or the magic treasures, they were all blocked outside by their joint forces. Zhang Yan stood on the cloud and didn't move. Since he released the Yuanying to fight, if he waited, he could use his deep magic power to exhaust the 5 of them to death. However, these people weren't easy to deal with. If he gave them time, they might think of a way to turn defeat into victory. At this moment, he had the initiative, and he had to control the situation of the battle. Whether it should be slow or fast, it was all up to him, and he couldn't let the other parties will go. He flicked his sleeve and a golden light flew out. He had already taken out the 5-spirit white carp shuttle. With a thought, he controlled the treasure to attack downwards. Among the 5 elders of the devil sect below, one of them immediately saw that something was wrong with the shuttle, and they didn't dare to let it hit them. Elder Chi's eyes sharpened, and he spat out a demon from his mouth. A devil head spat out from its stomach. This devil head's eyes weren't filled with cruelty and hunger. Instead, they were filled with craftiness and an indescribable light. After it came out, it let out a strange smile and flew toward the 5-spirit white shuttle. When Zhang Boyan saw this, he immediately sent a voice transmission warning. Be careful, Mannerhead. This is a water filth devil. It's made with over 9,000 devils by eccentric chi. It's made from the souls of tens of thousands of people who died unjustly, and a drop of netherworld spring water from the sect was used as a sacrifice to refine it. Normal treasures only need to touch a little bit of it, and their spiritual light will be ground away, turning them into ordinary objects. Even a profound level weapon will be tainted after touching it a few times. Zhang Yan nodded solemnly. His eyesight was also extraordinary. He could immediately tell that this demon was not only powerful in its ability to pollute. In particular, this treasure had its own intelligence, which meant that it was not under the control of its master and could hunt for prey on its own. Looking at the movement of the shuttle, it was really nimble and its flying speed wasn't slow either. With these strengths, how could he let the shuttle clash with it? He immediately ordered it to dodge. The demon came up and tried to catch the shuttle a few times. It nimbly dodged all of them, so it didn't persist. After forcing it far away, it didn't chase anymore and only patrolled outside. Only when the shuttle was 100 feet away would it go up to stop it. Zhang Yan's brows rose up. At this moment he was still fighting with the demon sect elder, suppressing 5 of them. Although he had the advantage, it wasn't easy. He couldn't make a move, otherwise, he would have used the purple cloud god lightning and he would have been able to suppress it. Lu Mainyang saw that the demon was difficult to deal with, so she frowned. Her fingers flew up and tens of white feathers shot towards the demon. These were items that she had taken from her body and carefully refined. They were as hard as metal, and unless it met an extremely sharp magical treasure, it wouldn't be able to cut through them. The devil's eyes lit up as if it had seen some kind of tonic. It suddenly rushed forward and swallowed all of the white feathers. Then, its body swayed and a wisp of clear chi emitted from the top of its head. It let out a few sharp howls and returned to its original position. Lu Mainyang was stunned, sighing and shaking her head. Elder Shen thought for a while and took out several yellow talismans from his sleeves. With a shake of his hand, he tossed them out. In an instant, they flew out like arrows. The devil laughed cruelly. Just like last time, he opened his mouth wide and swallowed several talisman papers with his chin. Then he smashed his chin twice as if he was savoring the aftertaste. Elder Shen made several techniques, but there was no response at all. The demon acted as if nothing had happened. He couldn't help but be shocked and thought to himself, this thing isn't easy to deal with. However, although he couldn't suppress it, he was still calm and wasn't anxious at all. With the heaven and earth lock technique in front of him, and the forbidden talisman of the door holding talismans, the 5 of them wouldn't be able to escape. Once their mana was used up, they would win without a fight. Elder Jean struggled to hold on against this unfathomable flood force. He knew that he could not hold on for much longer, so he said anxiously, this Zhang Yan's mana is boundless, it's bottomless. Now that he has a helper by his side, if we were unharmed, we could still fight against him with our treasured weapons. But now we can't. If this goes on, we will be killed by him. After a moment of silence, someone suggested, in my opinion, instead of all of us dying here, why don't we let one of us go out? Although he didn't finish his sentence, everyone understood what he meant. There was a secret technique in the demonic sect that could combine several people's blood into one person's body, increasing their mana. However, it was only for a short moment. Not only would the person who cast the technique have to bear great danger, the person who supplied the blood would also have no hope of survival. Elder Kim knew that he couldn't hesitate now, so he said, "Among the 5 of us, only Elder Chi is a second-stage Yuaniing cultivator. He's the one with the highest cultivation level here, so he should break out." Every elder of the evil faction here was the only one who survived the sword battle. Not only were their skills higher, but they were also quick to make decisions. They all knew that if they were killed here, their souls would disappear. But if their primordial spirits could still make it out, they could still be reincarnated. So once the suggestion was made, someone immediately agreed and said, "Okay, then let Brother Chi do it." The other 2 didn't voice out their objections. Elder Chi said solemnly, "I will do my best to break out." Elder Kim looked around and said, "Done, I gave up a cloud earlier, and I had a fierce battle not long ago. I'm already at the end of my rope, and I can't hold on for much longer. Everyone, I'll take my leave first." He raised his hand and swiped it across his neck. Immediately, a pool of blood flowed out. Elder Chi didn't stand on ceremony. He raised his head and sucked in all the blood. His face instantly turned red, as if he had consumed a great tonic. Elder Kim's body shriveled at a speed visible to the naked eye. His appearance soon turned into a corpse, and his hair and beard fell off. However, his consciousness remained, and he wasn't completely dead yet. He still commanded his Yuaniing to protect him. The other 3 didn't hesitate in the slightest in this life and death situation. They all raised their hands and slit their necks, offering their blood essence. In the blink of an eye, Elder Chi had sucked the blood of 3 people, and with every person he sucked, he became more spirited. His slightly aged face gradually returned to the appearance of a young man. His eyebrows were green, his nose was sharp, his lips were red, and his teeth were white. His eyes didn't contain any impurities, and even his hair had turned black. Anyone could tell that he was using a secret technique. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He didn't wait for the last person to be sucked in, and he reached into his sleeve. He grabbed 60 to 70 scarlet thunder beads in his hand, and with a shout, he threw them down. Elder Chi was originally full of confidence, and he was prepared to suck one more person's blood before breaking out of the encirclement. However, when he saw dozens of deep red beads falling from the sky, his expression changed, and he said in shock, "Scarlet thunder beads?" At this moment, he felt that although his body was full of magic power, it wasn't enough to break the restriction. He gritted his teeth and hurriedly summoned the demon, wanting to use it to block for a moment. However, the Een Water Filth demon had already gained intelligence, and when it saw the scarlet thunder beads coming over, it instinctively felt fear. Thus, it struggled there, unwilling to come over immediately. With this sliver of an opportunity, the scarlet thunder beads successfully broke in. Zhang Yan saw it clearly, and with a hand seal, 60 to 70 scarlet thunder beads exploded at the same time. Numerous deafening explosions resounded out as if the heavens were collapsing beneath the extreme sky, and even the talisman banners that Elder Chen had set up in the surroundings to trap the 5 of them were blasted to the point of slanting to the point of being deformed. Zhang Yan didn't wait for the outcome to be clear, and he leaped up into the air. With a shout, he pushed down the surging water light. Instantly, there were boundless waves that swept across, sweeping away the 5 Yuaniing in the air and everything below them. His actions, it was unknown whether it was because he had captured the main owner, or because he had disrupted the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth, but it actually caused the demonic clouds to show signs of collapsing. Inyadauren and the rest also heard the thunder-like rumbling above them, and it seemed like there was still a battle going on. It looked extremely intense, and they were extremely shocked. They couldn't help but ponder, the elders of Qinsong and Yuxiao have already returned, who else is fighting? Elder Lu shook his head. If that's the case, there are only 2 sects, Qinsong and Guangyun. Zhenren Zhang has the least number of protectors with him, and if he is surrounded by the demonic sect, even if he has Dragon Carp, he will definitely be at a disadvantage. Inyadauren hesitated for a while, and said, "Senior Martial Brother, should we gather our fellow Taoists to rescue him?" Elder Lu looked at him and said, "Are you afraid that the 3 talisman orders in Zhenren Zhang's hands will be taken away by the demonic sect?" Inyadauren felt a little awkward, and said, "It's just because we are all from the Xianmen lineage. Elder Lu waved his hand to interrupt him and said, "If the sword battle is won by the Xianmen, what's the point of the demonic sect taking the talisman orders? If the demonic sect wins, there is even less of a need to take them away." Above the extreme heaven, only the disciples of the sword battle could go. Even if the elder of the demonic sect took the talisman orders, he couldn't use them now unless he won the sword battle. If the result was the opposite, he would have to return them obediently. On the peak of Qinsong School, Elder Chen was very puzzled, and he thought to himself, "Zhang Yan just now, he has clearly come out of the demonic clouds. Why is there movement again? Could it be one of his protectors? I think he thinks his cultivation is high, and he doesn't want to take a detour, so he is targeted by the elder of the demonic sect. He is seeking his own death, and can't blame others." Just as the cultivators of the various sects had their own thoughts, the demonic clouds dispersed, and the sky became bright, causing them to raise their heads to look. At this moment, the sun was hanging high in the sky, and a celestial river flowed across the sky. The east and the west entered the netherworld, and golden light rippled, shining out 10,000 pill spirits and 1,000 morning sparrows. A young Taoist with a clear spirit stood in the sky, and with a wave of his sleeve, the water light slowly retracted. Following his movement, the turbid fog in the sky slowly dispersed, and a clear sky returned. And the dozens of elders of the demonic sect were nowhere to be seen, as if they were all killed by him. The cultivators in the gorge below all didn't move, and they looked at him blankly. Elder Chen revealed a look of disbelief, and he lost his composure as he stood up and said, "How is this possible?" Zhang Yan slowly raised his head, and he looked at the sky. With a long whistle, sword light suddenly rose, and wild geese flew past, turning into a rainbow, and went straight to the extreme heaven. Chapter 571. Along the way, Sun Huang's gangqi was fierce and surging endlessly. Even with the talisman protecting her, the brilliance on her body was like a candle in the wind, swaying indeterminately, causing her to move rather slowly. It was far from the speed of her usual sword escape. Not long after, he arrived in front of the huge star stone. Suddenly, a spiritual light flew over and collided with the light emitted by the talisman. It was like warm water entering one's arms. His whole body felt warm. The light also suddenly sped up, becoming several times faster than before. He knew that the light came to guide him, so he did not panic and let it take him. He turned into a light rainbow and went into an aperture. As soon as he entered the starstone, his field of vision was filled with strange rocks, and within it were a myriad of ravines and dark holes that twisted and coiled about, causing it to seem like a maze. He went with the light, and after a few rounds he could not distinguish north, south, east, and west. If a cultivator went in and out of this place without the talisman to guide him, not to mention the gangqi, just the chaotic path like a forbidden formation was enough to trap him to death. After a few miles, a light appeared in front of him. At this moment, the gangqi suddenly slowed down and gradually stopped. He took out the spell and kept the talisman. Then he spread out the sword light and rushed in. In an instant, the scenery changed. This place was a world of its own. The ground below was filled with majestic mountains, beautiful waters, precipitous cliffs, the sound of waterfalls, and gurgling streams. In the sky, there were countless flying peaks and strange rocks that hung in the sky, and they were like an array of stars that embellished the sky. There were countless of them. The small ones were around 300 m in size and were exquisite like jade. The large ones were thousands of meters in height and towered into the sky. This place was extremely vast. As for where the Qian Tian Junyang essence was hidden, because the elders in the sect did not mention it clearly, Sun Huang could only search for it himself. He was not in a hurry to go. After looking for a while, he leaped to a mountain peak and sat down to regulate his breathing. The spiritual qi here was so abundant that even the blessed grotto heavens were slightly inferior. In less than half an incense's time, he stood up in high spirits and looked into the distance. After determining a direction, he rode the sword light and flew towards a majestic hanging peak. Although his speed was not as fast as the extreme sword cultivators in the sect, It was far better than the disciples of the other sect. As he flew, he was like a flame trailing behind him. At this moment, his eyes suddenly narrowed as he saw a demon wandering on the peak. It seemed to be searching for something. His eyes flashed, and he casually sent out a beam of sword light, which instantly destroyed it. Then he ignored it and continued forward. At this moment, in another part of the Star Stone, the 6 disciples of the Devil sect had already gathered together. There was an abandoned temple built in the belly of the mountain, and green leaves flourished at the foot of the peak. The vegetation was lush, and there was a stream winding around it, gurgling as it flowed. The water was so clear that the bottom could be seen, and there were countless colorful flower petals floating on the water. The scenery was wonderful. Feng Haiyang's expression changed slightly. Previously, he had released more than 3,000 demon generals to search for the location of Jun Yang's essence in the Star Stone. Now that one of them had been destroyed, he immediately sensed it. After a silent inspection, he smiled and said, "Sun Huaying has arrived. Go 800 miles to the west, and you will find him. Junior apprentice brother Yuqi, it's time for you to show yourself." Inbone Sect's Yuqi Yun stood up and bowed. "Little brother will go and face the enemy now." Feng Haiyang said solemnly, "This is a battle of swords. Junior apprentice brother Yuqi's location is the most important part. We must not let Sun Huaying escape." Yuqi Yun said expressionlessly, "Even if I have to give up my life, I will not disappoint the senior apprentice brother's trust." Feng Haiyang looked at him for a moment, then shook his head and said, "Junior apprentice brother, don't talk about death so easily. Your aptitude and talent are all top-notch. If you stay alive, you will still have great achievements in the future. Previously, when we relied on the great arts of the various sects elders to cast on you, it was to block Shaoqing's killing sword, and the confidence is not small. I can promise you one thing. As long as you can hold Sun Huaying for 6 hours, no matter who wins or loses here, you can retreat on your own. You don't have to worry about anything." A hint of surprise flashed past the depths of Yuqi Yun's eyes, and his expression also fluctuated slightly. He did not say a word, and solemnly bowed to Feng Haiyang. Hunqing Sect's Lu Muqiu looked at the two of them and said, "Wait for me to send junior apprentice brother Yuqi on his way." Yuqi Yun turned around and bowed, "Thank you, senior apprentice brother." Lu Muqiu was startled. This junior apprentice brother of his was not so polite normally. He smiled and said, "Junior apprentice brother, no need to be so polite." He used a spell and shouted again. His hand pointed downwards, and a wisp of smoke sprayed out from his fingertips. A banner rose from the flat ground. This banner was as tall as a person, and on it was the landscape of mountains and rivers. At a glance, it was 70% similar to the scenery inside the Star Stone. However, it was like a reflection in the water, and the whole thing was upside down. It was both illusory and real at the same time. The clear waves were sparkling and swaying, and rippling without end. Yuqi Yun did not hesitate either. He swung his sleeves, and walked into the banner with large strides. He disappeared. Lu Muqiu used another spell, and the banner shook. Then, it pulled itself up from the ground and flew into the void. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace. This technique was known as the 10,000 miles ruler technique, and it had the wonders of moving the void. Cultivators only needed to know the enemy's position, and they could use magic tools to send a person there. If they did not go out of a radius of 1,000 miles, they would definitely be able to catch up within 100 breaths. After Lu Muqiu sent Yuqi Yun away, he stood silently for a moment and then made another spell. Then he threw out 4 talismans. Feng Haiyang and the others each took them, put them in their mouths, chewed them, and swallowed them. Immediately, there was light spurting out from their eyes and ears, and then it quickly disappeared. This technique was known as heart and shadow simultaneous illumination, and it was also one of the great magical powers of the Hunqing sect. Other people only needed to swallow one of his casting talismans, and everyone he saw, heard, and thought would know at the same time. Later, when Lu Muqiu used the 9 nether candle and 1,000 miles alluring sound, within a radius of 1,000 miles, as long as someone from the Shenmen appeared, the 5 people here would immediately be able to sense it in their hearts, and they would be able to use their magical powers to block and kill them. It was just that he had used 2 great magical powers consecutively, and his magical power was not small. Thus, he needed to meditate and adjust his breathing. Just now, when he used it again, he would not be exhausted. After Sun Huaying killed the devil, he didn't move for long before he suddenly stopped and turned his head. Not far away, a flag floated over, breaking through the air with great speed. When it came close, it unfolded in the wind, and a Taoist wearing a white robe and a tall hat walked out, his facial muscles stiff. He bowed and said, "Spiritual Master Sun, I am Yuchi Yun from the Bone Sect, and I am here to ask for advice." Sun Huaying looked at him seriously and nodded. "It's rare to have an opponent, very good." After he said this, he waved his sleeves, and in an instant, the lightning sword was like a rainbow, and it slashed forward. Yuchi Yun shouted, "Not good." He leaped up as if he wanted to dodge, but the distance between the two of them was extremely close, no more than 500 feet. That sword light was really too fast. He had just risen a few feet when that sword light had already pierced through his body. He let out a blood-curdling scream and fell down from the clouds. Sun Huaying frowned slightly. He called back the flying sword and placed it on top of his head. Then he closed his eyes, using the sword as his eyes, and focused on his surroundings. After a few breaths, a fierce light appeared in his eyes, and with a low voice, the sword ball turned into a rainbow and flew away, but it hit empty space. A strange cry came from there, and Yuchi Yun's figure appeared. He covered his chest and took a few steps back, his face full of fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but suddenly his body was cut in two, and he turned over and fell. Sun Huaying stood there for a moment, and suddenly looked back. He saw Yuchi Yun standing hundreds of feet away again, and he sighed, "Spiritual Master Sun's killing sword is sharp, and I really can't resist it." Sun Huaying shook his sleeves, and Yuchi Yun saw that the situation was not good, so he turned around and fled, but he didn't get far before the sword light caught up. He cried out and was already torn in two. His broken body also fell, and the fog under his feet disappeared in an instant. Sun Huaying waited for a moment, but there was no more movement. He didn't believe that this was the way to get rid of this great enemy, so he thought for a while and didn't search for his whereabouts. Instead, he stepped on the strong wind and slowly walked east. After walking for more than a mile, he stopped and looked up. He saw a man standing on the flying peak to the left, wearing a white robe and a tall hat, and his figure was as thin as a bamboo pole. The man smiled at him and bowed, saying, "Spiritual Master Sun, I am here." As soon as he finished speaking, a sword light suddenly jumped out of the void, and with a crack, it cut him in two. He immediately fell to the ground, and after a while, he became a pile of white bones, and then a pile of powder in the wind. But Sun Huaying didn't put away his sword. His eyes emitted a sharp light, and he looked around as if he was looking for something. With a laugh, Yuchi Yun walked out of the void and said with his hands behind his back, "Is Spiritual Master Sun looking for me?" Sun Huaying's face was calm, and he didn't move. If he guessed correctly, this was the bone insect's secret technique, the baleful white bone weapon. The cultivator of this sect could hide his spirit and real body in it. If one wanted to kill him, they would have to kill all the white bone weapons he brought with him, leaving none alive. However, this technique wasn't without flaws. If the real body was too far away from the white bone weapons, it wouldn't be able to control it, so the real person must be hiding in it and never far away. He snorted coldly, and with a thought, the sword pill flew back. At the same time, his body jumped, and he went to a high place. Without looking at Yuchi Yun, he brandished his sword. There was a thunderous sound, and a ray of light flashed out of the sword. It was extremely dazzling, and in the blink of an eye, it seemed like a crack was cut open in the sky. This was the Shaoqin killing sword's divine technique, severing spirit opportunity. When this sword slashed out, it could sever the spirit opportunity within 1,000 feet. Anyone who was hiding or using the technique of cloning would have no chance of survival under this technique. Seeing his actions, Yuchi Yun, who was below, seemed to sense that something was wrong. With a shout, A pale white aura faintly appeared in the void. Within each ball of aura, there was actually a person hiding. There seemed to be at least 100 of them, and every one of them seemed as if a great calamity was about to befall them. They let out wild cries and fled in all directions. No one knew which was the true body. But even though their speed wasn't slow, how could they be faster than the sword light? In a flash, Sun Huaying had already finished his technique, and with a loud shout, he raised his hand and pointed at the sword pill. In an instant, a ray of light spurted out and flew up, converging into a magnificent light. With another wave of his sleeve, this stream of light scattered in the blink of an eye. When the light and smoke passed, within a radius of 3 miles, the hundreds of figures had all turned into flying ash. Sun Huang looked for a moment and put away the sword pill. He was about to leave, but at this moment he heard a loud laugh behind him. Yu Qiyun slowly walked out from the void and saluted. "Sage Sun, the outcome hasn't been decided yet. Why go first?" Chapter 572. While Yu Qiyun and Sun Huaying were fighting, Feng Haiyang and the others had already borrowed Lu Muqiu's divine ability to see everything. The demonic sect had only sent 6 people this time, which was far inferior to the Xianmen sect. As a result, they could not afford to make any mistakes, or they would be in danger of being overturned. The step of dealing with the Shaoqing disciples was especially crucial. Although Yu Qiyun had the help of the various sect's elders, he had never faced off against a Shaoqing disciple, so he was not completely confident. Now that everyone saw that Sun Huaying was being held up by him, their solemn expressions relaxed. Jiuling sect's Yan Huixin said casually, "It was worth it for us to help junior brother Lu earlier on. By the looks of him now, he should be able to hold Sun Huaying back for quite a while." Sword cultivators were good at flying and were not afraid of being surrounded. Even if they attacked together, it would be useless. On the other hand, Sun Huaying possessed the killing sword technique. When the sword slashed down, it was impossible to block. Even if there was a way to trap and kill her, they would probably lose 1 or 2 people. At that time, how could they talk about winning against the celestial sect? The best way to deal with such an opponent was to restrain him. Su Nyangzi rejoiced and said, "Fortunately, the Shaoqing disciples have always been alone. If there were 3 of us this time, we might not be able to fend off the enemy." Feng Haiyang smiled and said, "Shaoqing has always been like this since the beginning of the sword duel. There has never been an exception. Even if we send out 3 disciples this time, our Lingqi sect will just think of another way to deal with them. Fate is with us. If we can fight for it, we'll fight for it. If we can't, we'll try to avoid it." Although the luck of the demon sect was flourishing with their current strength, they were still much weaker than the celestial sect of wonders. If they were to lose to the celestial sect of wonders this time, it would be considered a loss, but it would not shake their foundation. When the remaining 4 devil's caves of the Donghua continent emerged one by one, the devil's doctrine would truly flourish. While the 5 of them were talking, their expressions suddenly changed as they sensed something. Lu Muqiu hurriedly cast a spell and said, 300 miles away, 2 female cultivators came. They should be disciples of Li Mountain sect." He paused for a moment. He continued, "There are also 2 people 150 li away. Judging from their appearance, it seems they are very dangerous. They must be the Nye brothers of the Southern Flower sect." Because of the summoning talisman, the disciples of the various sects entered from different doors, although they were all in the same direction. However, they were spread out over a wide area. The closest one was less than 100 miles away, while the furthest one was more than 1,000 miles away. After Lu Muqiu used 2 divine abilities. Although his eyes and ears were sharp, he couldn't cover everything. There would always be something he missed. This time, he had only found the whereabouts of the disciples of Mount Li and Taihao sects. As for whether there were disciples from other sects who had entered this place, he was not sure. Fortunately, Feng Haiyang had released thousands of demon generals to patrol the area on both sides. They would always be able to detect if someone was coming. He wouldn't miss it. Feng Haiyang used the heart and shadow simultaneous illumination technique to see who it was. He immediately said, According to the plan, we should take them down one by one before they merge. Among the disciples of these two sects, Li Mountain sect's cultivation is the weakest. We should eliminate them first. Then, he clasped his hands together and said, "I'll go now. I'll leave the rest to you." Everyone hurriedly returned the greeting, saying that they wouldn't dare. Lu Muchio did not dare to delay any longer. He immediately took out a hand seal, and a wisp of green smoke flashed, and a flag appeared on the ground. Feng Haiyang walked in. The flag shook slightly, and it flew out, disappearing in the blink of an eye. After Lu Muchio finished the technique, he looked slightly tired. He sat down, took out a pill from his sleeve, and swallowed it. Then he meditated to circulate the medicinal energy. Using this divine ability consumed a lot of mana. If the two from Li Mountain sect escaped separately, he would still need to help Feng Haiyang teleport. It would be much faster than chasing them by flying. However, it would consume a lot more mana. Therefore, he could only coordinate with Feng Haiyang alone. If there was another one outside, he would be helpless. Chao Minru entered the Star Stone and first released the protective light. Then she silently investigated. She realized that there were no strong winds to borrow, and her speed was much slower than usual. After pondering for a while, she took out 3 light feathers and blew on them. Then she pinched a spell on her finger and shook it slightly. Unexpectedly, 3 spirit birds appeared in her hand and began to chirp. This was the spirit materialization technique. The birds looked vivid and lifelike, but in reality, they were not living creatures. They were formed by spiritual energy through the feathers. Chao Minru raised the back of her hand, and the 3 spiritual birds flapped their wings and flew into the sky. They flew in search of the disciples of the other 3 sections. Previously, the disciples of the 4 sects had discussed that once they entered this place, they would have to communicate with each other through flying letters. They would meet up earlier to prevent the disciples of the Devil sect from attacking them one by one. The person walking with her was a young woman in green. Her hair was cloudy, and her waist was slender. She was exceptionally beautiful. Her bright eyes looked around, and suddenly, her expression tensed up. She pointed in a direction and said, "Senior Martial Sister, look over there." Chao Minru also felt that something was amiss. She turned around and saw a banner flying over from the horizon. It suddenly flew over and stopped 1,000 feet away from them. The banner unfurled itself in the wind. A short while later, a yellow-robed Taoist with a full forehead and distinct facial features stepped out from the banner. Chao Minru only took one look, and her face turned pale. She cried out, "Feng Haiyang?" She had seen Feng Haiyang in action before. Not to mention his strange and inexplicable Dao technique and the illusionary deluge of 10,000 spirits, just his cultivation level of the 2nd tier of the nascent soul realm was enough to suppress the sword-dueling disciples. The 2 of them were simply no match for him. If the disciples of the other sects joined forces, they might still be able to fight against this person. Otherwise, they would definitely lose. Now that they had encountered this person, the only way was to try to escape from his hands. She made up her mind and said hurriedly, "Junior Martial Sister Xiang, let's go our separate ways. If we meet someone from the same sect, we can try to come back and help." Junior Martial Sister Xiang also knew that the situation was urgent, so she did not say anything. The 2 of them immediately turned into rainbow lights and went their separate ways. Feng Haiyang had already expected this to happen, so he was not in a hurry. He shook his body and hundreds of demons flew out to chase after Chao Minru. He himself turned around and used the underworld escape technique. He turned into a cloud of yellow smoke and chased after Junior Martial Sister Xiang. His escape technique was very good, and it was only slightly weaker than the sword escape technique. In just a few breaths, he had already caught up. Junior Martial Sister Xiang saw that she could not escape, so she bit her lower lip and stood still. The cloud above her shook, and a ray of light shone down, protecting her body. At the same time, she waved her sleeves and took out a colorful agate stone. It hung above her head and emitted a lot of colorful smoke. It was obviously a protective treasure. She knew that regardless of mana or Dao techniques, she was far inferior to Feng Haiyang. She did not expect to escape, but only hoped that she could hold on until her senior martial sister met someone from the same sect and then come to her rescue. Feng Haiyang smiled faintly. If there was enough time, he did not mind trapping this woman first, and after Chao Minru came to her rescue, he would kill her as well. However, he did not know when Hua Xian, Zhou Huang, Zhang Yan, and the others would arrive at the Star Stone. Therefore, he did not want to waste time and only wanted to end the battle quickly. He shook his shoulder and released 3,000 demons at the same time, and they surrounded the woman. Then, he did not care about the result and said loudly, "Junior Marshal Brother Lu." Lu Muchio had been paying attention to the situation of the battle. When he heard Feng Haiyang calling him, he immediately knew what to do and used his Dharma again. Feng Haiyang saw that the flag flew in front of him without any wind. He immediately waved his sleeves and walked into it. After a dozen breaths, when he came out again, he was already in another place. He looked around and saw that Chao Minru was flying in front of him. She was only a few miles away from him. He shouted and leaped into the air. His body turned into a rolling yellow smoke and seemed to cover the sky. He flew and chased after her. In just a moment, he had caught up. He casually grabbed a few bolts of Yin thunder and threw them down. Chao Minru saw that he was chasing after her, and her heart sank. Just now, she saw that Feng Haiyang was chasing after her junior martial sister. Now that he was here, it was obvious that he had been killed. She felt a sense of sorrow in her heart. However, this was not the time to be sad. She forced herself to pull herself together and first stabilized her body. Then, she raised her hand and pointed at the high cloud above her. It seemed like she was stirring up some spiritual energy. Immediately, there were strands of ice that spread out like tassels and pearls. They hung in the air and shone brightly. The Yin thunder fell silently and disappeared into nothingness. With just this one move, Feng Haiyang was able to tell that this woman's foundation was exceptionally solid. It was not something that the woman from before could compare to. Therefore, he did not underestimate her. He lifted his foot and stomped down. A loud bang rang out, and in an instant, a jet-black torrent rushed out and surged forward. As long as the torrent of water collided with the treasured light, it would be able to dissolve the spiritual energy. Even if it was a magic weapon, it would be tainted by it. Chao Minru didn't panic in the slightest when she saw the torrential waves approaching her. She raised her slender fingers and sliced off pieces of scattered light like she was cutting paper. She seemed like she was plucking the strings of a zither. Her slender fingers danced ceaselessly and flicked out numerous beams of light that collided with the tribulation water that was assaulting her. However, after a while, the torrent of water became even more violent. It was as if there was no end to it. The waves behind pushed the waves in front of it. The torrent of water did not rush straight up. Instead, it was like a dragon circling around her. In the blink of an eye, she was trapped in the inner circle. Chao Minru saw that she was surrounded by the torrent of water. She could not help but turn pale. If the torrent of water were to be activated at the same time, would she still be alive? She did not care about wasting her mana. She shouted and sent Yuanying out of the door. She made a hand sign and used a secret technique of the Lishan sect called falling flowers. As soon as this technique was used, there were clouds floating around her body. The clouds were colorful and dazzling. Occasionally, the torrent of water that splashed entered the clouds and disappeared without a sound. This supernatural power was not ordinary. As long as the cultivator's mana was not exhausted, he could defend against all kinds of Dao techniques. If the cultivator's mana was strong enough to cultivate to the highest level, it could be said that no technique could touch him. With Chao Minru's cultivation, it was very difficult for her to use this technique. Even if there was no external force attacking her, she could only maintain it for 40 to 50 breaths. By then, she would not even have the strength to escape and could only be killed. However, she was forced into a desperate situation. She could only delay as long as she could. She could only hope that the disciples from the other 3 sects would be able to find her as soon as possible. Feng Haiyang was very observant. With a glance, he could roughly guess her weakness. He smiled and was about to activate the torrent of water. At this moment, he felt something in his heart. Lu Muchio's voice rang in his ear. He said, "Senior brother Feng, the Nye brothers from the Nanhua sect are rushing towards you. They are 100 miles away now." Chapter 573. 4 Yuanying cultivators. A distance of 100 miles would only take a few minutes, even without the help of the astral winds. The Southern Flower sect, on the other hand, had spirit birds that could fly even faster, so it wouldn't be long before they arrived. A dark light flashed in Feng Haiyang's deep eyes, and he shook his sleeve, urging the tribulation water to move even faster. Only 10 breaths later, he heard a long cry in the distance. He raised his head and looked over. In the distance, 2 black dots had already appeared, and they were swiftly flying over. Chao Minru resisted with all her might, using all the Fa Li she had left in her body, but under the pressure of the tribulation water, she found it harder and harder to resist. Seeing that Jin Yun, who was protecting her by her side, was gradually dispersing, she was afraid that it wouldn't take long for the water to overwhelm her. She clenched her teeth and took out a bamboo basket that was filled with thousands of flowers from the fragrance pouch. She held it up and shook it. Suddenly, colorful flower petals sprinkled out. The fragrance assailed her nostrils and surrounded her body. It immediately blocked the tribulation water 3 feet away from her so that it wouldn't come any closer. However, her face was still full of worry. Although this magic treasure had the ability to protect her, she didn't know how long it would last under the pollution of the tribulation water. Just as he was feeling anxious, he suddenly heard a long cry by his ear. His spirit was immediately roused and a bit of hope was born in his heart. From afar, Nye Gui saw the tribulation water swirling around, as if it was surrounding someone. He pointed and said, "The bird's messenger isn't far from here. Fellow Taoist Chao must be trapped within. Eldest brother, we need to hurry." He was about to urge the spirit bird under him to go forward, but Nye Zhang stretched out his hand and stopped him, saying, "Second brother, wait." Nye Gui had no choice but to stop, saying anxiously, "Why is eldest brother stopping me? Why can't we talk later?" Although the 2 brothers came from the same mother, their personalities were different. Second brother Nye Gui was very arrogant and full of determination, while eldest brother Nye Zhang's personality was more cautious and conservative. He constantly looked around, and his eyes showed vigilance as he said in a low voice, "The disciples of the devil sect came here earlier than us, but only Feng Haiyang is here. I'm afraid there's a trap, and we have to be on guard. Second brother, there's no need to rush over. Wait until fellow Yang and fellow Tong arrive. It won't be too late to fight again." Nye Gui raised his eyebrows and said unhappily, "Elder brother's words are incorrect. Fellow Taoist Chao is fighting bitterly at the front. He is in imminent danger. If my brother does not save him, he will definitely be harmed. We are all from the celestial sect of wonders. How can we not save him? Even if it's a mountain of knives or a sea of fire, I'm not afraid." Nye Zhang did not have any relationship with the 2 female disciples of Li Shan sect. To him, it was just a small matter. The most important thing to consider was his own safety. Looking at Chao Minru's appearance, it seemed that the situation was already hopeless. Even if the 2 of them went forward, they might not be able to save her. The other 5 devil sect disciples were nowhere to be seen, so it was hard to say that they didn't have any ulterior motives. Therefore, he was reluctant to take the risk. But Nye Gui's words stood on the side of righteousness and could not be faulted. Nye Zhang also could not openly refute him, and could only resentfully say, "Then second brother, you must be careful. I will support you from the side." Nye Gui proudly said, "Elder brother does not need to interfere. Watch how I fight him." He urged the magpie under his feet to catch up. Not long after, he was 1,000 feet away from Feng Haiyang. He raised his head and gave a long, clear whistle. The 2-headed magpie under his feet heard his whistle and the right head immediately lifted up, spitting out balls of clear fire. This fire had the ability to dispel impurities. Even if there was a hidden move in front of you, it would be swept clean. Its power was not ordinary and few people could withstand it. Feng Haiyang gave a huff and calmly waved his sleeve, creating a vast gust of wind that easily scattered the attacking clear fire. Niegue's pupils shrank. This was clearly relying on his profound cultivation and pure mana to bully him. He glanced to the side and saw that the tribulation water was shrinking. It was obvious that Chao Minru, who was trapped within, could not hold on for much longer. He knew that he had to use a strange move. His thoughts changed and he took out a long, golden feather from his sleeve. He raised his hand and gently touched it, throwing it towards the sky. He repeatedly chanted incantations and the feather fluttered. In an instant, it became the size of a mountain and pressed down. Feng Haiyang's expression was normal, as if he did not care. The 3 clouds above his head spun and created a black wind that was like a tornado. It easily stopped the giant feather. Of course, he wouldn't just defend and not attack. He also formed a spell and waved his sleeve. The tribulation water under his feet suddenly rose up and rose higher and higher. When it reached a height of 1,000 feet, it suddenly fell down and the boundless waters surged forward with a loud rumble. Niegue was not afraid at all. With a shout, the strong cloud above his head rose high into the sky. With a shake, a one-legged bird with gorgeous feathers flew out. It fluttered and danced in the air, circling once on the spot. Immediately heavenly rain gathered and fell majestically. In an instant, it converged into a large lake and met the bird. The 2 waves collided, but the tribulation water was a level higher. It broke through the water in front of it and rushed over. Niegue's expression was solemn. He formed a spell and summoned a strange beast from the clouds. This beast had a bull's body and tiger's stripes. It had 2 horns on its head. As soon as it appeared, its 4 hooves stomped in the air and a large wave appeared under its feet. The originally weak water received an inexhaustible amount of spiritual energy and regained its strength. It was able to block the tribulation water for a moment before collapsing. Feng Haiyang's cultivation was far higher than his. With this kind of mana, it was obvious that Feng Haiyang was a level higher. Nie Zhang saw that it was difficult to block the enemy head-on. He shouted from behind, "Second brother, this person's mana is much higher than yours. There is no need to force yourself. Quickly move away." Niegue was not in a hurry to move. He had his own plans. Right now, the main point was not to defeat Feng Haiyang, but to force him to turn around and fight with him. From there, he would be able to get rid of Chao Minru. The more power he exerted here, the less pressure Chao Minru would be under. If he moved away, Feng Haiyang would have the opportunity to kill this woman. After weighing the pros and cons, he did not dodge the fierce wave that was coming at him. Instead, he sat down and formed a spell with his fingers. The clouds above his head suddenly expanded to 1,000 feet. When it reached its maximum, a dragon head could be seen poking out. Its eyes were the size of lanterns. They flashed wildly as if it was inspecting the situation around it. Niegue shouted at it, "Ibai, why aren't you helping me?" Following his voice, the dragon's body trembled. Even though it was unwilling, it had no choice but to pull its 10,000 feet long body out of the clouds. It clawed at the air with its 4 claws. Instantly, smoke and clouds appeared. It flew into the air and opened its mouth to spit. A huge wave came down from the sky. The wave surged and finally blocked the tribulation water that was almost in front of Niegue. Niegue's face was slightly pale. This was caused by the excessive consumption of Fa. Among the 6 insects that he had controlled, this dragon was the most ferocious and had the greatest supernatural power. However, it was also the most difficult to control. When attacking an enemy, if one didn't first use a great technique to subdue it, it would be very difficult to control. If it wasn't for the fact that it was difficult to deal with Feng Haiyang using normal methods, he wouldn't have released this long insect. Right now, even though he had gathered the power of the 3 insects and blocked the tribulation water, the waves were still crashing over. Every time they hit, his body swayed and he almost couldn't sit still on his mount. Niegue thought about how Feng Haiyang still needed to use a portion of his Fa Li to attack Chao Minru. He wasn't attacking with his full power. He couldn't help but be shocked. He thought to himself, this person's Fa Li is so strong that only Zhang Yan can compare to it. He's much stronger than me. Even so, I still can't save fellow Chao. He thought for a while and took a deep breath. He put his hand into his robe and took out the 8 spirit bird tablet talismans. Immediately, 8 birds appeared in the sky. Each of them was handsome and heroic. Once the decree was issued, they would spread their wings and pounce forward from different directions. Feng Haiyang stood there quietly and didn't move. Suddenly, there was a whistling sound. Behind him, more than 100 demons rushed out. They bared their fangs and brandished their claws. They all looked ferocious and split up to meet the flying spirit birds. They fought with them. Even though most of the demons were tied up, there was one nimble vermilion bird. Because its body was small and it was fast, it managed to avoid many of the demons. With a flash of red, it rushed into the inner circle and stirred up chaos. Niegui's eyes didn't blink as he stared at Feng Haiyang. At this moment, he was holding a white feather between his 2 fingers. He seemed to be waiting for an opportunity. Seeing this, his eyes flashed. With a shake of his hand, the feather suddenly crossed 100 feet and pierced right in front of Feng Haiyang. Feng Haiyang also seemed to be caught off guard. He let out a muffled groan as the long feather pierced through his protective light. In the blink of an eye, it pierced through his chest. Niegui was overjoyed when he saw this. He knew that Feng Haiyang wouldn't let him go. With a loud roar, the strong cloud above his head spun and rumbled. In one breath, he shot out more than 100 bolts of strong lightning. All of them hit the body of this great enemy. Feng Haiyang seemed to have lost the ability to resist and was instantly blasted into pieces by the strong lightning. Chao Minru had been doing her best to hold on. At this moment, she saw the tribulation water in front of her shake and scatter as if it had lost its master. Her body felt light and she looked up just in time to see the scene of Feng Haiyang being blasted into pieces. She had used up almost all of her Fa Li. Her mind was exhausted and she was relying on her last breath to hold on. She could barely keep her body in the air. When she saw this scene, she couldn't help but relax. The flower petals around her fell to the ground. She was no longer on guard. Nie Zhang had been watching the battle from behind. When he saw that Feng Haiyang's body was blasted into pieces, he was also in a daze. But in the blink of an eye, he came to his senses and hurriedly reminded, "Fellow Chao, be careful." But it was too late. Suddenly, dozens of demons came out of the void and bit Chao Minru's body. They were about to eat her up. Niegui's eyes turned cold. He grabbed a bolt of strong lightning and struck it. With a boom, not only did this bolt of lightning kill Chao Minru, it also blasted the demons that wanted to eat her into pieces. In his opinion, rather than letting Feng Haiyang swallow Chao Minru's blood and primordial spirit to increase his Fa Li, it was better for him to kill her. Nie Zhang couldn't help but be silent. He didn't think that his second brother would be so decisive. Although it was the right choice, killing a direct disciple of Li Mountain sect would probably cause trouble if they could return to the sect. At this time, they suddenly heard the sound of surging tide. Both of them turned to look and saw the tribulation water that was scattered around them was flying over from all directions and converging in the middle. In a short while, it had turned into a raging river. After a short while, it had spread out for several li. In the tribulation water, a wave suddenly shot up and piled up like a hill. After it rose to the height of a person, it collapsed to the sides. Feng Haiyang's tall body was slowly revealed from head to toe. In the end, he stood on top of the wave. His robe fluttered and his expression was calm. Looking at him, he was completely unharmed. He wasn't injured at all. Chapter 574. Inside the Star Stone, 2 flashing sword lights flew side by side towards the west. They were Yang Bai and Zhu Xen of Yuanyang sect. After entering this place, they had also received Chao Minru's bird message and rushed over to meet up. However, because of the talisman, they were quite far away from the 2 disciples of Li Mountain sect, at least 600 li. Even if Lu Muchio used his divine arts to search, he couldn't find out where the 2 of them were. Because there was no extreme heavenly astral wind to travel through here, the couple's speed was far slower than usual. Fortunately, they had cultivated a Qi sword escape art and could use the Qi of Gung metal to control the sword. Comparing the 2, they weren't too slow. After traveling for a while, Zhu Xian's eyes lit up. She suddenly pointed to the front and said, "Husband, look over there." Yang Bai looked in the direction she pointed and saw a huge cloud of qi in the distance. It spread out for more than 10 li. From time to time, he could see flashes of light. He could also vaguely hear the cries of birds and the roars of beasts. It was obvious that there were people fighting there, and the battle was quite intense. He said in a low voice, "Looking at the situation, it seems that fellow Taoist from Nanhua sect has encountered an enemy. The two of us should quickly go and help." Zhu Exen had no objections and said cheerfully, "It's all up to husband." The two of them used their escape arts, and the sword lights shone brightly as they rushed forward. After traveling for a while, Yang Bai suddenly felt something was wrong. He glanced to the left and said in surprise, "The two Taoists from Taihao School have also arrived." Zhu Xian also turned her head and looked over. She saw a gigantic green jade gourd floating in the sky, and it was moving slowly in the sky. She immediately recognized that it was Taihao School's Tong Ying Yuan's magic treasure. Because the gourd was huge, it was very easy to recognize. She relaxed a little and thought to herself, "Fellow Taoists from Taihao School are fine. I wonder if senior sister Chao and the Nie brothers are together. I only hope they are safe." As they got closer to the light cloud, Yang Bai and Zhu Exin heard the sounds of collisions getting louder and louder. It was obvious that a fierce battle was going on. Tong Ying Yuan's flying speed was too slow, so it wasn't convenient for them to go over and greet him. Instead, they sped up their sword lights. Zhu Exin said worriedly, "Husband, I wonder how those fellow Taoists are doing?" Yang Bai looked very relaxed. He said, "Presumably, the Nie brothers are still fine. Otherwise, why would there be such a big commotion?" There was one thing in his heart that he didn't say out loud, and that was that the Nie brothers had come riding spirit beasts. They couldn't be treated as ordinary people. If the battle went against them, they would be able to think of a way to escape. As they spoke, they had already arrived at the ball of spiritual light. The two of them stabilized the light and took a glance at the situation, and they couldn't help but be shocked. The demons in the field were ferocious. Fluttering in the sky, the illusory tribulation water of myriad spirits surged, and it was vast and unrestrained as it encircled the Nie brothers within it, causing them to seem like reefs at the center of a river. He was being ravaged and trapped there, bitterly resisting the powerful force of the water. However, each wave of the tribulation water was higher than the last, and it surged ceaselessly as if it had endless power. If this continued, they probably wouldn't be able to resist for long. The two brothers didn't look good at the moment. Nie Gui's face was pale, and there were traces of blood at the corner of his mouth. His chest was heaving up and down, and he was slightly out of breath. The two-headed magpie under his feet was dispirited and listless, crouching on the clouds. One of its heads drooped down, and its neck seemed to have been broken. The majestic flood serpent that had been protecting him by his side now only had a single eye left. White Phosphorus's body was stained with blood, and a few of the claws under its abdomen were broken. Moreover, its tail was badly mutilated. It looked like it had just gone through a desperate battle. Nie Zhang was in an even more sorry state. The bun on his head was untied, and he didn't bother to tidy it up. A piece of the golden crown on the scarlet magpie under his feet had been bitten off, and it was dripping with blood. Next to him was a human-faced snake that had lost one of its wings, and it was whimpering there. Feng Haiyang's yellow robe and hair draped over his shoulders, and he stood in midair. His expression was relaxed, and it was obvious that he had the upper hand. When the young couple arrived, he only gave them a sidelong glance and didn't look at them anymore, as if he didn't care about them in the slightest. Yang Bai originally thought that the Nie brothers were surrounded and attacked by several disciples of the devil sect, but now that he saw that it was only Feng Haiyang here, he changed his mind and felt that this was a great opportunity. If the few of them worked together and could keep Feng Haiyang here, then what about the other 5 people? It would be even better if they could seize the talisman while they were at it. So he said loudly, "Fellow Nie brothers, please don't panic. I've come to lend you a hand." When the Nie brothers saw the two of them arrive, their originally dispirited spirits were once again roused. Nie Zhang replied loudly, "Fellow Yang, fellow Zhu, This person's magic is strange and difficult to defend against. You and your wife must be careful. Earlier, when Nie Gui and Feng Haiyang were fighting, they were fighting evenly. However, because of a moment of carelessness, a strange devil came out of nowhere and bit the spirit bird he was riding on. This miscalculation caused the situation to take a turn for the worse, and in the blink of an eye, they were trapped in the tribulation water. Nie Zhang was afraid that something would happen to his brother, so he also came to help. However, that strange devil came out of its own accord and bit the spirit bird he was riding on. In just a moment, the two brothers were trapped in the tribulation water. The cultivators of the Southern Flower sect had always relied on flying beasts to travel. Even though they could fly through the sky, their own movement techniques were the weakest among the 10 sections. They tried to break out of the encirclement a few times, but they were unable to kill their way out. Up until now, the spirit birds and earth beasts they had brought with them had long been used up. Even the 6 insects they were controlling had died in battle. With Feng Haiyang's profound magic power and the filthy power of the tribulation water, if no one came to save them, the two brothers would sooner or later end up like Chao Minru. Yang Bai looked down with an extremely cautious expression. He first placed the octagonal sword disc on top of his head, then reached out and grabbed, catching a gust of golden qi. In the blink of an eye, it condensed into a magic sword. He then pressed down on the tip of the sword and warned Zhu Exin, "Wife, I heard that the Netherworld Spring sect has a yellow springs movement technique that can allow one to go up into the sky and into the earth. Feng Haiyang seems to know how to use it. I'll make the first move later. Save some strength to prevent him from escaping. Remember, when the opportunity arises, use your sword. If you can kill him, then kill him. If you can't, then think of a way to trap him." When the two fellow Taoists from Taihao School arrive, the 6 of us will work together, and he will still die. Zhu Exin nodded seriously. When they were in Chengyuan Gorge, she had personally witnessed the battle between Feng Haiyang and Yang Bai. However, he was not determined, so he lost the upper hand and was always at a disadvantage. He never had a chance to turn the situation around. Even though Yang Bai had no intention to fight back then, he admitted that even if he fought back with all his strength, the best result would be to escape by luck. As for winning, it was impossible. Therefore, Zhu Exin had long regarded this disciple of the Netherworld Spring sect as her greatest enemy. She did not dare to be careless. Yang Bai stood on the side and watched for a while. Then he found an opportunity. His body turned into a golden rainbow, and he rushed down with his sword, killing his way into the battle. He activated his magic power, and the sword disc on top of his head spun. There was a buzzing sound, and countless sword rays flew out, cutting deep marks in the air. The golden rays on the sword were dazzling, almost as bright as the sun. His sword ray was condensed by the golden qi. It was pure and condensed. It could be created and destroyed at will. It was a rare thing that was not afraid of filthy things. Once he attacked, he pounced forward without any hesitation. With the husband and wife sharing the burden, how could the Nie brothers not seize the opportunity to break out of the encirclement? Each of them formed a thunder conjuration art. Strong thunder continuously fell from the high cloud above their heads, exploding and scattering the tribulation water that surrounded them. This water was not afraid of treasures or Taoist techniques. It could only be countered by thunder techniques. However, because cultivators came from different sects, they all had their own weaknesses and strengths. Among the 10 sects, only the Huanjin Temple and the Qinsong School valued this technique the most. The two of them were not good at it, so the power of the strong lightning was very weak. After attacking for a while, they still could not open up a path. Instead, there were demons coming in through the gap that they created earlier, forcing them to think of ways to protect themselves. Feng Haiyang saw that Yang Bai was charging at him with high fighting spirit. His sword ray was unusually fierce, and it tore all the demons in its way into pieces. With Feng Haiyang's mana, he only needed to use the high wind to suppress this person. However, he still needed to suppress the Nie brothers, so he did not want to fight him head-on. Just as he was about to use the underworld escape technique to dodge, just now, a sword came from the side. It was as if the sword knew where he was going, and it blocked his way. Feng Haiyang did not need to look to know that it was Zhu Xian coming from behind. His eyes flashed, and he quickly moved to the side to avoid the sword ray. At the same time, his body turned into a muddy yellow smoke, and he wanted to escape. However, he only flew a few feet away when he saw a sword ray coming from above, and it blocked his way again. Because the sword ray was too fast, it arrived in the blink of an eye. He did not even have time to perform the conjuration technique, so he could only turn the smoke around and dodge to the side. Zhu Exen seemed to have known that he would dodge to this place. She shouted and pointed with her finger. The sword ray was like a tide, and it shot toward him like a storm, forcing him to retreat to the other side. The young couple's minds were connected, and they were also from the same sect. They cooperated very well with each other, and they did not leave any gaps when they attacked. They slashed continuously, and everywhere they passed, a sharp sword ray was left behind, and the space that Feng Haiyang could dodge to was getting smaller and smaller. However, after a few breaths, the rain of light in the sky was like a weave, and countless sword rays were born. It was like an inescapable net, and Feng Haiyang was forced into a corner. The husband and wife shouted at the same time, and the sword ray moved quickly. It came from the left and right, and like a pair of scissors, it cut Feng Haiyang into two pieces. Yang Bai shouted again, and the sword ray was like a hurricane, and the two halves of Feng Haiyang's body that were still in the air were cut into pieces. It seemed that this slash was not enough to vent the sword intent in his chest. He turned into a sword ray and soared into the sky, and he let out a long and clear cry, which spread far and wide. When Ye Zhang heard Yang Bai's clear cry, he seemed to have thought of something, and there was no joy on his face. Instead, his expression changed and he shouted, "Be careful, you two. This man seems to have a death substitution technique." Sure enough, as soon as he finished speaking, one of the devil heads in the sky suddenly swayed, and Feng Haiyang walked out from its mouth, without a single injury on his body. He looked up at Yang Bai and said with a smile, "I have long heard about the golden luo sword net technique of the Yuan Yang sect. Now that I have seen it, it is indeed extraordinary." Yang Bai's heart sank, and his expression became extremely serious. How should he deal with this kind of unkillable enemy? Chapter 575. Zhu Exen flew over with her sword and stood next to Yang Bai. She looked at Feng Haiyang with extreme caution. Just now she had clearly struck him with her sword, but now it seemed that this person was not injured at all. If that was really a death substitution technique, it was extremely ingenious. Listening to Nie Zhang's words, Feng Haiyang seemed to have used the same technique before. She couldn't help but think of the sword battle in Chengyuan Gorge, where the magic sealing instrument of an Ata temple didn't seem to be able to do anything to him. She moved closer to Yang Bai and said softly, "Husband, can we use that?" Yang Bai shook his head. He did have a way to break the death substitution magic. For example, the Yuan Yang sect's spirit sword only needed to capture a wisp of aura, and then it would be able to find an opportunity to kill the owner of the aura. However, although this sword was powerful, it also had its drawbacks. If it was broken by someone, it would be like putting half of his life in the hands of someone else, and this was not what he wanted. In his opinion, since he and his wife couldn't defeat Feng Haiyang, it would be better to wait for Tong Inyuan and Tong Inyuan from Taihao School to come and attack him together. That way, they would have a higher chance of winning, and there was no need to take this risk. Thus, he replied, "I was too impatient just now. The most important thing now is to save the two Taoists from the Southern Flower sect. My wife, follow me later. We'll use our sword chi to break through the tribulation water." Zhu Xian immediately understood what he meant and nodded slightly. The two of them unleashed sword rays and flew up to the sky, one from the south and the other from the north. They held the sword board in the air and cast a spell at the same time. In an instant, thousands of golden sword chi rained down and landed on the tribulation water of 10,000 souls. Immediately, a crack was torn open, and as the sword chi rained down, the crack seemed to be expanding. Seeing this, the Nie brothers didn't know that the opportunity was right in front of them. They desperately released heavenly thunder and ordered the strange beasts to use their divine arts, stirring up waves and attacking the tribulation water. Obviously, they were trying to open a way out. Originally, Feng Haiyang had been suppressing the Nie brothers with all his might. If no one had interfered, he would have been able to take them down in no time. Just now, when he was dealing with Yang Bai and his wife, he mainly focused on restraining and delaying them instead of fighting them head-on. Now that he saw the two of them attacking the water with their sword qi, how could he allow his efforts to go to waste? With a loud roar, thousands of demons rushed out of the water and took the initiative to meet the sword qi. Although they were continuously being torn apart, they were actually able to withstand the attacks and delay the sword qi for a while. He suddenly waved his sleeve, and with a rumble, the tribulation water that had been torn apart closed up again, forcing the Nie brothers to have no choice but to retreat. Yang Bai, on the other hand, was not shocked. Instead, he was delighted. He could clearly see that the demons that were killed by the sword aura were floating in the air and did not regroup. Only a few hundred demons were still wandering around. It was obvious that Feng Haiyang had used up all his energy and did not have any energy left to summon more demons. If this were to happen a few more times, Feng Haiyang's transcendence energy would be completely exhausted. He thought to himself, no matter how powerful this person is, he is only one person. How can he compete with the four of us in transcendence energy? He gave Zhu Xan a look, and the latter understood his intention. She increased her power, and as the sword board spun, the sword qi gushed out like a tidal wave. The sword qi converged into a golden ray and pressed down again. Feng Haiyang didn't dodge. He shook his shoulder, and 3 strong clouds rose above his head. The strong wind whirled, and a cloud of black water mysterious smoke rose up, blocking the sword light. At the same time, he raised his hand and pointed to the sky. A demon appeared out of thin air, and it pounced toward the Yang couple. It was very fast, and it didn't fear the dense gold qi on both sides. In an instant, it rushed within 100 feet of them. Yang Bai humphed and shook his body. The sword board on top of his head released a ray of sword ray, and he slashed it. He wanted to destroy the demon with one strike, but when the ray of sword ray reached its body, there was a dang sound. It was as if the ray of sword had hit steel. The demon did not stop at all, and it continued to bite. Yang Bai felt a chill down his spine. He felt that this demon seemed to be special. Even with the protective light, he did not dare to test it with his body, and he quickly dodged. Zhu Xen softly shouted, and in time, she pointed with her finger. A waterfall of sword rain exploded, and the demon was sent tumbling away. However, the demon somersaulted dozens of times in midair, and when it stopped, it shook its body. It was completely unharmed, and it grinned hideously at the two of them. Suddenly, its body disappeared. Yang Bai frowned. They had never seen such a strange demon before, and because they could not figure it out, they did not dare to be careless. With a thought, he reached out and grabbed a handful of golden qi. He chanted a spell and sprinkled it down. In an instant, countless golden leaves danced and spun around him, and they moved outwards. At first, they were very small, and then they grew to hundreds of feet wide, and the sky was covered in golden light. Under such Dao techniques, even if the demon had a concealment technique, it was still forced to reveal itself. It looked at the two of them fiercely, and with a shrill cry, it flew into the sky. However, Feng Haiyang managed to recover from this momentary gap. He took a deep breath and made a hand seal. Several miles away, a howling demonic cloud flew over. Zhu Xen unintentionally glanced at it, and saw that there was a female cultivator in the black fog. Her eyes were closed, and she was being held in midair by a group of demons. She floated around with the black fog, and from the looks of it, she was not dead yet. She exclaimed, "Husband, look, it's junior apprentice Sister Xiang." Yang Bai turned his head, and when he saw this scene, he was shocked. The demon sex techniques could swallow a cultivator's blood, flesh, and primordial spirit for their own use. If this woman was swallowed, wouldn't Feng Haiyang gain a lot of mana? He immediately shouted, "My wife, quickly follow me and stop him." The two of them hurriedly made the spell, and the golden plate above their heads spun. Once again, they released their sword aura, which merged into one and attacked the demons. They wanted to stop them, but they were afraid of hurting the female cultivator named Xiang, so their sword aura was not as sharp as before. Feng Haiyang had fought with 4 disciples of Lishan sect and Nanhua sect, and each time, he used his profound mana to suppress his opponents. He looked calm, but in fact, he had used up a lot of energy. Now that there were 2 more disciples of Yuanyang sect, even though he was a cultivator of the 2nd level of Yuanying, he felt a little tired. Luckily, he had already anticipated the possibility of being surrounded, so he purposely kept this woman alive, waiting for this moment to be of use to him. He laughed loudly and waved his hand to release a banner. He held it in front of him, and at the same time, he waved at the hundreds of demons. As if they were forced to do so, the demons suddenly let out a hoarse howl, and their bodies turned into a stream of mist rushing forward. Their speed was more than twice as fast as before, and they flew past him. When they reached the tribulation water, they suddenly spread out in all directions, and the woman fell into the water, disappearing without a trace. Feng Haiyang heard the continuous whooshing sound, and he looked up. He saw a golden light flashing above his head, and the sword aura had torn the banner apart, and was coming towards him. He calmly used the underworld escape technique, and a yellow smoke rose from his feet as he retreated. After obtaining the blood essence of the female cultivator named Xiang, his mana became a little more abundant. He made a spell, and with a little movement, more than 1,000 demons appeared from the tribulation water, and took the initiative to collide with the sword aura. The 2 collided, and after a short while, they all disappeared. Yang Bai saw that Feng Haiyang's spirit had recovered, and his expression immediately became very ugly. At this time, Zhu Exen pulled his sleeve and said happily, "Husband, the 2 Taoists from Taihao School have arrived." Yang Bai turned his head to look, and saw a green jade gourd flying over from the horizon, and on it stood a handsome young man, wearing a blue robe with green ribbons. He was in high spirits, and there was also a fat Taoist in his 40s, who was riding a bamboo raft that could fly to the sky. He was slightly behind Yang Bai, and he was not far from them. Seeing this, his anger turned into joy, and when he turned to look at Feng Haiyang, his expression was full of cold laughter. Feng Haiyang frowned, and it was obvious that he had also noticed the arrival of the 2 people from Taihao School. These 6 people were the elites of their respective sects, and their supernatural powers, Taoist techniques, and magic treasures were all extraordinary. If they attacked together, it would be really difficult to deal with them. For now, he had to find a way to get rid of 1 or 2 of them, and then he would be able to fight them. Thinking up to this point, a bright light appeared in his eyes, and he shouted in a low voice. His body suddenly sank down, and he turned into smoke and flew away. In an instant he was only 100 feet away from the Nye brothers below. He glanced at the 2 of them, and with a light wave of his sleeve, a large mass of extremely dense black smoke flew out from his sleeve. As it flew out, it seemed that even the sky and the earth seemed to darken. When this wind flew out, it wriggled, and it was not very fast. However, everywhere it passed, whether it was the demons or the water, they all disappeared in an instant without a trace. The Jiao python did not know how powerful it was, and with a roar, it suddenly pounced forward. When it arrived in front of the wind, it actually did not make a single sound, and it turned into dust and flew away. When the Nye brothers saw this scene, their faces turned ashen. This Jiao python had the toughest body among the strange beasts, and even this beast could not resist for a moment. Then, it would be useless for the other strange beasts to go up against it. It was obvious that they would not be able to escape this disaster. This technique was called 9 Nether Great Sorrowful Wind, and it was one of the great supernatural powers of the Netherworld Spring sect that had not appeared in the world for a long time. Although its power was great, it not only consumed a lot of vitality, but it also had a pity, and that was when it was used, the spiritual energy would surge like a tide, and it would be very easy for the enemy to detect it. If the enemy was skilled in escape techniques, they would be able to escape in advance. If it was not for the fact that the Nye brothers' magic power had been exhausted, and they were trapped in the water with nowhere to escape, Feng Haiyang would not have used this technique so easily. With death approaching, Nie Zhang's eyes became blood-red, and he suddenly roared, "Second brother, go back and avenge me." He formed an incantation gesture, and with a rumbling sound, the cloud above his head exploded. In a split second, his nascent soul flew out from his head, and unexpectedly transformed into a white ape that was 100 zhang tall. It raised its thick arms high, and with a swipe towards the sky, it immediately tore apart the tribulation waters, and allowed the light of the sky to penetrate through, opening up a path. Nie Gue knew that his elder brother was sacrificing his life to open up a path for him, and he did not want to disappoint him. He let out a sorrowful howl, and with a heart spell, he immediately turned into a clear light and escaped. Seeing that he had escaped, Nie Zhang grinned, and the black wind blew over, and the protective treasure light on his body was like a candle being blown away by a fierce wind, and was suddenly extinguished. The water of the tribulation rushed over, and in the blink of an eye, he was sucked in, and with another spin, it crushed Yuanying's body, turning it into spiritual energy, and absorbed it. After using the 9 nether great sorrowful wind, Feng Haiyang's expression was slightly tired, but now that he had the nourishment of the blood essence of Yuanying's cultivator, he immediately became energetic again. He stamped his feet on the ground, and his body turned into yellow smoke, and suddenly rushed into a banner. The banner swayed on the spot, and suddenly disappeared. When it reappeared, it was already behind Nie Gue, and with a wave of his sleeve, hundreds of demon heads rushed out, and bit Nie Gue's body. Chapter 576. On a steep cliff within the Star Stone, Lu Muchio sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. He was using his divine power to observe all movements within the perimeter. Suddenly, his eyebrows twitched and he opened his eyes. He said in a deep voice, "The 3 from Qinsong School have entered this place." As soon as he said this, the few demonic sect disciples sitting around him had a solemn look on their faces. Lu Muchio continued, "Huoxian went one way alone. Zhong Muqing and Luo Qingyu went the other way." Su Nyangzi straightened her body and looked left and right. She said seriously, "Even if Zhong and Mu's cultivation is not as good as Huoxian's, they are not too far off. Fellow Taoists, when I fight against Huoxian, I hope I don't make any mistakes." Lu Muchio looked to the side and said to a handsome cultivator in a red robe, "Senior Marshal Brother Yen, how is the arrangement going?" Yen Huixin smiled and replied, "I have already ordered the spirit soldiers to set up restriction banners on the surrounding 12 peaks. Later, I will send one out and try to lure the 2 of them here. I think we should be able to hold them off for half an hour. However, if they ignore us and leave, I can't think of anything else." Lu Muchio already had a plan. He took out an item and placed it on the rock. He pointed at it and said with a smile, "With this item here, I think this is enough as a bargaining chip." Yen Huixin's eyes brightened. He clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Wonderful, wonderful. What plans does Brother Taoist Feng have?" "I see. With this item, we don't have to worry that Zhong and Luo Qingyu won't come." Su Nyangzi frowned and said, "Only half an hour?" Although she had already practiced her sect's divine power to the highest level and was confident that she could hold Huoxian back for a long time, she couldn't allow outsiders to interfere during a battle. Otherwise, all her efforts would be in vain. Lu Muchio thought for a while and observed for a while. He said slowly, "In another half an hour, I think Senior Marshal Brother Feng's battle should be over by now." Because of the heart and shadow simultaneous illumination technique, if Su Nyangzi were to look carefully, she would also be able to see the scene of Feng Haiyang fighting at this moment. She also had the intention to look, but was suddenly shocked. She cried out involuntarily, "How did that Tong guy from Taihao School get 3 jade jasper purple sun seeds in his hands?" She'd once fought Tong Inyuan in the gorge, so she was deeply aware of the might of the violet jade sun seed. In detail, there weren't many profound artifacts in the world that could go against this treasure head-on, let alone this person actually possessed 3 of them. If she went up now, all 3 seeds would have to do was to shoot at her simultaneously and she would probably be killed in an instant. Lu Muchio, on the other hand, looked very relaxed. He said with a smile, Sun Yangzi, don't worry. Senior brother Feng has been in the Yuanying state for almost 300 years. The Taoist techniques that he has cultivated are not something that we can understand. I think he has a way to deal with it. Don't worry about him. Sun Yangzi thought carefully and lightly nodded her head. For the past thousands of years, because the spiritual energy in the devil's cave was not abundant, the number of devils was low, and because they were wary of the Xianmen, the 6 demonic sects did not dare to wantonly slaughter living beings. Even if they had the rudimentary methods of many secret Taoist techniques, they were unable to cultivate them to a profound realm. It was also in these past 200 years, with the gradual rise of the devil's calamity, that many of the sect's elites, under the arrangement of their masters, had a glimpse of the rudimentary Taoist techniques. From then on, they had cultivated an extremely profound set of Taoist techniques. Feng Haiyang was one of them. Lu Muqiu said, Huxian is only 600 miles away from where we are. There's no time to lose. I'll cast a spell on Sun Yangzi and send you there. As soon as he finished speaking, he stretched out his hand and pointed. A cloud of smoke passed by and a tall banner immediately rose from the ground. Sun Yangzi immediately stood up and bowed to everyone. She then walked into the banner. With a wave of the banner, it immediately rose from the ground and flew into the clouds with a whoosh. As for the demon spirit, Yan Huixin, he originally wanted to find a way to lure Luo and Zhong to this place. Hence, there was no need for him to cast a teleportation spell. With a thought, he sent him out. After Lu Muqiu sent Sun Yangzi out, he took out a pill from his sleeve and consumed it. He then sat there and slowly worked on it. After a while, Yan Huixin stood up and sneered, Yu Xiao Zhou Huang has also arrived. He's fast. Let me go and meet him. Lu Muqiu used his Taoist technique to take a look. His expression changed and he raised his head to remind him that Xie Keming and Zhou Huang are on the same side. Even though this person is not famous to be able to participate in the sword battle, he's obviously not a mediocre person. Senior brother, how are you going to deal with him? Yan Huixin looked up to the sky and laughed. I'm not going to fight him to the death. I'm just delaying and obstructing him. Do you think I can't do that? Junior brother Lu, just sit here and watch me. Lu Muqiu nodded. He was relieved. He knew that during the sword battle in the gorge, Yan Huixin had not actually brought out his true abilities. Jiuling's sect disciples were able to attach their souls onto devil spirits and engage in an intense battle with their enemies. Even if their physical bodies were destroyed, as long as their souls were able to escape in time, they would only lose a spirit weapon Dharma body. While it might be difficult to defeat Zhou Huang, it wasn't difficult for them to deal with him. He conjured a spell and raised the banner from the ground. Yan Huixin cupped his hands towards the surroundings and stepped into it. Following Lu Muqiu's incantations, he followed the banner to another place. 700 miles away. Zhou Huang stepped on a streak of light and surveyed his surroundings. As his eyes flashed, sharp starlight would shoot out from time to time. Xie Keming looked at the scene within the star stone and asked, Senior brother, where should we head to? Zhou Huang had received the secret teachings of the elders of the sect and knew that the Gantian Junyang essence should be within a treasured pot. It was just that the pot had a life of its own and would roam the skies, making it extremely difficult to capture it. Who knows, it might even be hidden within some mountain peak. Therefore, he said, the Gantian Junyang essence is what we want. There's no need to bother about anything else. Among the disciples of the devil sect, other than Feng Haiyang, he didn't really care about any of them. Even if 6 of them were to join forces and attack him, he would be able to avoid them with his heavenly cycle square. Xie Keming suddenly lowered his head. When he raised it again, his eyes were filled with killing intent. He leaned over and said in a low voice, Senior brother, that Zhang Yan is still behind us. This is a good chance. Why don't we? He made a horizontal slashing gesture with his hand. Zhou Huang's eyes flashed. It was obvious that he was also a little tempted. He thought for a while and felt that since this place was so big, the disciples of the devil sect would not be able to find the Gantian Junyang essence in a short period of time. Moreover, at this moment, the 10 Xian men of the Donghua continent had all entered this place. They had most likely already started fighting, so there was no need to rush over. Besides, Zhang Yan might arrive soon. If that was really the case, it was indeed a good chance to get rid of this person. He nodded and said, "Okay, then you and I will wait here. When that Zhang Yan arrives, we will think of a way to get rid of this trouble. Kemming, go north, I will go south. If you see Zhang Yan, remember to send a letter to me." He thought for a while and took out a crystal mirror that was polished to the point that it had no edges. He threw it to Xie Kemming, pointed at it and said, "This is the moon washing mirror. Within 500 miles of the mirror, anyone who wishes to see the scenery will be able to see it vividly." This item was originally a pair, divided into the sun and moon mirrors. This one is the moon mirror. I originally wanted to leave it for Qingyun, but now that she has passed away, you can use it. When Xie Kemming heard Zhou Qingyun's name, he could not help but feel sad. He took the mirror and rubbed it for a while. His eyes were filled with deep-seated hatred as he gritted his teeth and said, "I swear to take Zhang Yan's life to avenge senior sister." Zhou Huang couldn't help but frown, and then he glanced at Qin Shi and warned in a cold voice, "Based on my observations, that Zhang Yan's cultivation might even be slightly higher than yours. If you encounter him, then you must remember to tell me. You must not act rashly, understand?" Towards the end, his tone was incomparably stern. Xie Kemming's heart trembled when he heard this, and he tried hard to calm his mind. He cupped his hands and said, "Yes, senior brother. This little brother will remember." Zhou Huang's expression softened. He patted him on the shoulder and gave him a few more warnings before the two of them went their separate ways. After Zhou Huang had gone half a mile, he took out the moon-washing mirror and placed it by his side to illuminate the surroundings. He then rode a ray of resplendent starlight and broke through the clouds as he headed south. After flying for 200 or 300 miles, he saw the mirror light up as if something was flying towards him. Taking the mirror closer, he saw that the thing flying towards him was a banner. Looking at its shape, it seemed to have the ability to move through space. He sneered and immediately suppressed the fleeing light, stopping there to wait. After a short while, he saw the banner fly over from afar. With a few shakes, it arrived in front of him. It then paused in the air, and a young Taoist who was 7 feet tall and covered in a red robe walked out. Behind him, there seemed to be countless figures moving about. However, when he looked closely, there seemed to be nothing at all. This Taoist bowed to him and said, "Perfected Zhou, Jiuling Sect's Yen Huixin has come to seek guidance from you." At the same time, another ray of clear light flew into the door at the side of the star stone. When the light dissipated, the figures of Zhang Yan and Elder Shen were revealed. Zhang Yan had just kept the talisman when he suddenly felt his body sink. Using his heart to check, he found that the North Sea sword clone hidden in the center of his brows was hidden in the depths of his acupoint. He tried to activate it, but it did not move. He revealed a look of surprise. After thinking for a while, he called out to the mountain river boy in his heart again, but there was no response as well. He could not help but think to himself, "Looking at this situation, it seems like it has been suppressed." What he did not know was that this star stone was originally an artifact refined by a powerful cultivator. A restriction had been set up on it long ago, and any artifact that could harm its body would be suppressed by it. If he had brought the North Sea sword clone here, even with the talisman in his hand, he would be blocked by the astral winds, and would not be able to enter the star stone at all. Zhang Yan smiled. Even without the help of the Dark North swords, he wasn't worried. Presumably, the cultivators here were like him, without any true artifacts. He was confident that he would be able to deal with these powerful enemies by relying on his own divine abilities and Taoist techniques. He raised his head and stood up. Elder Shen looked around, stroking his beard and sighed. "It is indeed as ancestor Shen Chong said. The spiritual qi here is even better than the blessed paradises." Zhang Yan nodded in agreement. He had been to the floating heavenly palace before, and if he were to seriously compare the spiritual qi here, it would be hard to tell which was better. However, when he scanned his surroundings, he faintly noticed that there seemed to be a place where the spiritual qi seemed to be denser. He couldn't help but look carefully. However, this feeling came quickly and left quickly. When he tried to sense it again, he couldn't feel it at all. At this time, a long beam of light suddenly swept over from an extremely far distance, instantly sweeping across this part of the world. Less than 100 miles away from the two of them, Xie Keming held the crystal mirror in his hand, gritted his teeth and said, "Zhang Yan, let's see who will protect you this time." Chapter 577. Xie Keming saw that Elder Shin and Zhang Yan were standing together. Despite the hatred in his heart, he knew that he was no match for the two of them. He took out a jade talisman from his sleeve and activated his mana. The item shook slightly and flew out of his hand. He then stared at the mirror and waited for Zhou Huang to arrive. The mirror light shot over and illuminated the entire place. Zhang Yan and Elder Shin naturally sensed it as well. Elder Shin's eyebrows knitted together as she spoke in a deep voice, "I wonder who is spying on us." Zhang Yan smiled, but he didn't seem to mind. Instead, he asked, "Where does Elder Shin think the essence from beyond the heavens is?" Elder Shin saw that he changed the topic and did not mention it. He thought for a moment and said while stroking his beard, "In the past, our sect's founder, Shin Chong, once said that when the extraterrestrial essence is absorbed, because of the fierce fire poison, if we cultivators rashly refine it, we will be burned to ashes and die. Therefore, in the past, a great cultivator once threw a treasure into this star stone called the Junyang pot. After being nourished by it, one can use it. However, that treasure pot has a spirit of its own and will wander around. This star stone is so vast, it will not be easy to find it." Zhang Yan raised his hand and pointed forward. He smiled and said, "Fellow Shen, the place where the light came from is about 100 miles away from here. It seems to be a scouting treasure. If we can borrow it, it will be much easier to find that pot." Elder Shen was startled and said hesitantly, "I don't know if that person is a friend or foe." Zhang Yan smiled. This was the entrance to the star stone. He and Elder Shen should be the last Xian Men disciples to enter this place. However, the other party came to investigate at this time. It was obvious that they had some kind of purpose. Maybe they were here for the two of them. Just now, the light should be less than 100 miles away from here. If it was someone from Xian Men, they should show themselves. However, they still did not come out. It was most likely that the other party was an enemy. However, he did not say it out loud. He only smiled and said, "Fellow Shen, you will know if you follow me to take a look." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned into a sword light and flashed towards the source of the light. Elder Shen also took out a flying talisman with 2 fingers. With a gentle shake, a ray of light appeared on his body and carried him to chase after them. Xie Keming held the crystal mirror in his hand, observing Zhang Yan's movements while waiting for Zhou Huang's arrival. But as he glanced around, he suddenly raised his head, only to see a rainbow-like sword light flying toward him from afar. He never thought that Zhang Yan would dare to take the initiative to find him, and his heart tightened. The sword light was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, it had already arrived within 5 kilometers. To cultivators, this distance was already very close. Xie Keming was full of enmity towards Zhang Yan, so he naturally would not treat him as someone who came over to greet him. His eyes suddenly became bloodshot, and a cloud above his head suddenly rushed up 10 feet, rolling intensely. Then he let out a shout and used his divine ability 3 times. More than 20 lightning pearls flew out from the cloud, and as if they were splashing down, they shot towards the sword light. Zhang Yan's expression was calm. When the lightning pearls arrived in front of him, he did not dodge. Just as it was about to hit him, a ray of water climbed up from under his feet and immediately swept all of them away. Then he stopped the sword light and calmly appeared. He said, "So it's fellow Xie. Instead of dealing with the disciples of the devil sect, you came to deal with the people of Xian Men. What is the meaning of this?" Xie Keming was so angry that he laughed and scolded loudly, "Zhang Yan, who is the same as you? You killed my senior sister from the same sect. In the Chengyuan Gorge, I had no choice but to compete with you. Now that you've delivered yourself to me, it's good that you've come at the right time. See how I'll take your life." Zhang Yan looked at him a few times and nodded seriously. If that's the case, I'll fulfill your wish. However, since it's not a spar between fellow cultivators, Daoists, don't blame me for bullying you with numbers. As he spoke, another ray of light flew over. It was Elder Shin, who had already flown over on a talisman. He stopped not far away from Xie Keming and stood in a position without batting an eyelid. Xie Keming sneered and said, "Do you think I'm afraid of the two of you?" Although his tone was tough, a trace of anxiety surfaced in his heart. According to his thoughts, if Zhou Huang had rushed over after receiving the letter, he should have arrived by now. But why hadn't he appeared yet? Could it be that he was hiding at the side waiting for an opportunity? Or did something happen? But now that he had shed all pretense of cordiality with Zhang Yan, the speed of his sword escape was far from what he could compare to. If he were to turn around and leave now, he would definitely not be able to escape. When Elder Shin heard this, he knew that this person must have something to rely on. His expression turned solemn as he took out a stack of talisman paper and threw it out in all directions. This talisman could give off a warning, so if someone was spying on him, he would be able to detect it immediately. Since he had already shed all pretense of cordiality, Zhang Yan did not hesitate at all. His eyes flashed, and a sword light shot down from the sky. Xie Keming shouted and took out dozens of white magnetic gold thorns from his sleeves, charging towards the flying sword. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He knew that this object could attract sword chi, so he didn't wait to collide with it. Instead, he lowered his sword, wanting to avoid the golden thorns. That day, Zhou Qingyun had used this needle to fight against Zhang Yan, but she had been flung away by the flying sword. It wasn't that the needle wasn't good, but rather that she was busy cultivating her Dao technique and didn't have the time to study this technique. Xie Keming, on the other hand, was different. He had spent a lot of effort on this set of talismans. With just a little control, the dozens of golden thorns shone brightly and produced an extremely strong suction force, causing the sword pellet that had already flown over 100 feet to deviate a little. Xie Keming revealed a look of joy. With a low roar, he pointed from afar. The dozens of golden thorns that were originally gathered suddenly exploded and shot in all directions. If every one of them could occupy a position and his mana wasn't exhausted, no matter how the sword pellet split up, it would be trapped inside by the strong suction force between the golden thorns and unable to break out. How could Zhang Yan give him this chance? Just as he thought about it, the sword light suddenly sped up, breaking free from the restraint and killing its way out. When it reached the top of the sky, the sword light flickered and pointed downwards. With a slight shake, it split into more than a dozen swords. They didn't enter the inner circle, but flew around the outer circle, flashing dazzling circles in the sky. Xie Keming suddenly felt nervous. As long as one of these flying swords suddenly entered the inner circle, it would definitely disrupt his formation. If he couldn't block it, what followed would definitely be a storm-like attack. Zhou Qingyun and the others could use the heavenly cycle square to escape, but he hadn't learned this kind of magical power. The only way to deal with it was to defend himself, so he didn't dare to use the white magnetic gold thorns to chase after them. He only scattered them around to protect himself. But in this way, he would also lose the initiative. Just now, Elder Shin wasn't in a hurry to act. Only now did he realize his chance. With a light flick of his wrist, the sword seal in his hand was sent out. In a split second, a ray of light entered through the gap. This sword seal wasn't like a sword pill. After using it once, it needed to gather chi before it could be used again. But because of this, its power was extraordinary. It was as if the protective treasure light could be broken in one blow, and only a magical treasure could block it. Xie Keming was also a disciple of Yu Xiao, so how could he let such an unknown thing crash into him? With a thought, a ray of black light descended from the high cloud, rushing towards the sword seal and actually holding it firmly in place. Elder Shin was startled. He formed several seals, but the sword seal seemed to have lost its connection and couldn't be called back. He couldn't help but be secretly shocked. He thought to himself, what an impressive Dao technique. Xie Keming wasn't a member of the Zhou clan, so he couldn't learn the Heavenly Universe Realm's same book. What he cultivated was one of the 4 qi, the Inner Yuan Imperial Balance chapter. Those who cultivated this technique at the Mystic Light Realm weren't much better than cultivators of the same generation. When they reached the Core Transformation Realm, after cultivating day and night, they could nurture 3 streams of magic qi in their dantian. These 3 qi were divided into 3 colors. The black color was fixed qi, which could block magical treasures and spirit weapons. Once it flew over, it would be difficult to get rid of it. The crimson color was judge qi, which could be used to defend or attack. Dao techniques and curses would lose their effect upon contact. The frost color was li qi, which could be used to attack or defend. If it touched a person, it would be as if they were entangled by a snake. Their limbs would become stiff and numb, and it would be difficult for them to move their mouth and tongue. As the cultivators' cultivation deepened and their magic power improved, the power of these 3 qi would also become stronger. In Chengyuan Gorge, the reason why Xie Keming still dared to fight against Zhang Yan after seeing his powerful magic power was because he had these 3 qi in his body. He thought he had a chance of winning. Although Elder Shin's mind was spinning, his hands weren't slow. With a shake of his sleeve, hundreds of dazzling golden talismans floated out, trying to force Xie Keming to let go. Xie Keming sneered. His body swayed, and he shook the judge qi in his abdomen. He opened his mouth and spat out a scarlet light at the hundreds of talismans. When the light shone on the talismans, there was a sizzling sound, as if hot iron had been thrown into boiling water. White smoke rose, and the talismans lost their spirituality, turning into a pile of waste paper that fell to the ground. Even though he'd won a move against Elder Shin, this action had also distracted him. In just a moment of absent-mindedness, a streak of sword light had already penetrated through the gap in the formation. On the way, it suddenly split into a few streaks, and they successively slashed onto the protective treasured light on his body. It actually broke through in one go. Xie Keming shouted, and the lunar balance treasure robe on his body released a circle of bright white moonlight, blocking the sword light outside by a hair's breadth. The 3 clouds above Elder Shin's head shook, and he roused his magic power. After all, he was a cultivator of the 2nd level of Yuaning. In terms of magic power alone, he was far superior to Xie Keming. With this exertion, the sword talisman immediately broke free from the settled qi. With another hand sign, it instantly turned into a streak of light and slashed at the treasure robe, causing a loud bang. Xie Keming's body shook. Although he had the protection of the profound weapon and was not injured in the slightest, he was still pushed back by the sword talisman's power. Zhang Yan took a step forward, and a myriad of waves surged beneath his feet like tidewater. Everywhere it passed, the white magnetic gold spikes were all collected, and he'd already cleared the path ahead. Zhang Yan smiled coldly and waved his hand. With a thought, a total of 12 spikes shot out from all directions, and they attacked together towards the center. Xie Keming turned pale with fright. Even though the lunar balance treasure robe was a profound weapon, he didn't have the confidence to resist such a ferocious sword move. His shoulder shook, and the li qi in his abdomen arose, causing red light to shoot out from his 7 apertures to tightly wrap around his body, causing him to look like a large red cocoon. Even though this action consumed a great deal of magic power, he couldn't care too much about the urgent situation before him. Elder Shin's expression eased up slightly. His gaze was cunning, and he knew that at this point, there was no need for him to use any formidable techniques, and he only had to maintain his offense without stopping. No matter how many magic treasures and divine abilities Xie Keming possessed, if no one came to save him, then only death awaited him. Thus, he held the talisman in his hand and circulated his magic power, causing the golden light of the talisman to suddenly explode out and blast out along with the sword light. Chapter 578. In an instant, Xie Keming was struck by over 10 sword lights. Not only was the protective treasure light on his body slashed apart, even the vermilion red brilliance seemed to have diminished greatly. He hurriedly circulated his magic power once more, wanting to circulate the profound technique to protect himself once more. But at this moment, another few hundred talisman papers assaulted him. Every single talisman paper collided with his body and exploded out with a thunderous sound. His body trembled ceaselessly like a candle in the wind, and the protective treasure light that he'd just activated was destroyed once more. Elder Shen's method of grasping timing was extremely shrewd. He attacked just at the instant his treasure light was about to appear, causing him to only consume his magic power for no reason. Xie Keming was extremely anxious in his heart, and he said anxiously in his heart, "Why hasn't Senior Brother Zhou come here yet? Could it be that he's met with some sort of trouble?" Even though the three of them had fought for a long time, it had actually only been a dozen breaths of time. He felt that it was already difficult for him to hold on. It wasn't that his magic power was insufficient, but he was being suppressed by their tide-like attacks. Wave after wave of attacks assaulted him, and they utterly didn't give him the chance to circulate his magic power. When he saw the red light on his body gradually dissipate, Xie Keming suddenly realized that if Zhou Huang really couldn't rush over in time, then he might really die here. Even though he harbored bone-deep hatred, he couldn't help but feel panic in his heart when death was imminent. After another few breaths of time, Zhang Yan noticed that Zhou Huang's aura had weakened slightly. He formed a seal and silently circulated it for a moment. The cloud above him expanded, and a violet light flashed. With a crack, a thick bolt of lightning struck down diagonally and smashed right onto the top of Xie Keming's head. The remaining protective red light on his body dissipated along with it. Xie Keming was struck by a bolt of violet sky divine lightning, causing his ears to ring and his mind to become dizzy. But he didn't lose his consciousness, and he forcefully endured the discomfort in his body as he poured his magic power into the moon measurement robe and was still about to struggle. At this moment, a crimson light swept over and instantly sliced off the bright light on his robe. Zhang Yan shouted when he saw that Xie Keming had lost the ability to defend himself. With a shake of his sleeve, a drop of Xianming heavy water flew out, and it traversed over 100 meters. Bang! It struck right on his back. Xie Keming let out a blood-curdling screech. His spine had already been smashed to pieces, and he fell onto the cloud. A flying sword flew over from the side, and with a crack, the head was cut off. Blood immediately gushed out from the neck. At this time, a beast-ear copper cauldron suddenly flew out from the corpse. White smoke rose from the cauldron as it shook. Then, he turned into a streak of green light and flew towards the west. Zhang Yan recognized that it was a spirit-protecting precious cauldron, which could temporarily hold the cultivator's yuanying and prevent it from dispersing. Suddenly, his expression changed and he looked up. Unknowingly, the sky was already covered with thick clouds. Elder Shen saw that he didn't move and became anxious. Zhang Yan wasn't afraid of the people from Yuxiao school, and he even killed the Zhou clan's disciples. Even if others found out that he killed Xie Keming, he probably wouldn't care. However, his Guangyun sect was small and weak. If they offended Nanhua sect, at least they still had the Qinsong behind Zhang Yan to help them. However, Yuxiao school was different. If they found out that he and Zhang Yan attacked their disciple together, the consequences would be severe. How could he let the yuanying escape? Thus, he said, "Taoist Zhang." Zhang Yan knew what he was thinking and nodded his head. With a serious expression, he said, "Fellow Taoist, please go ahead and return quickly." Elder Shen instantly heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly cupped his hands. He hurriedly got up and chased after him. After Daoren disappeared, Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said in a clear voice, "Fellow Taoist has been hiding here for a long time. Now that I'm alone, why haven't you shown yourself?" He had many tricks up his sleeves. If he used them all at once, even without Elder Shen's help, killing Xie Keming would be a piece of cake. However, he was a cautious person. Ever since he entered this place, he had been guarding against people spying on him. Therefore, he only used the tricks he used during the sword fight in the gorge. He didn't expect that there was really someone hiding in the side. Just now, he suspected that the other party was Zhou Huang. However, when he thought about how the other party had not come out when Xie Keming died, it was obvious that it wasn't him. Just now, not long after his voice came out, he suddenly saw the thick clouds rolling and stirring. Then, he gradually heard the muffled sound of thunder. The surrounding spiritual chi swirled and gathered towards that direction. It was as if some kind of supernatural power was brewing behind the clouds. After a short moment, the clouds split open as if a hole had been opened in the sky. A large blood-red hand that was thousands of feet in size stretched out from within, bringing with it a surging blood mist as it pressed down with the force of 1,000 caddies. Zhang Yan laughed and didn't dodge. He also performed a spell. After a while, a yellow light rushed up from the high cloud and turned into a huge hand that was condensed from pure yellow smoke. It also became thousands of feet in size and brazenly went up to meet the hand. Between the heavens and the earth, the two gigantic hands slowly approached each other. Time seemed to pass by for an extremely long time, but at the last moment, they suddenly sped up. With a bang, they violently collided with each other, and a rumbling sound rang out, almost echoing throughout the entire starstone. The two huge hands seemed to collapse at the same time. In the sky, only the yellow smoke and blood mist were left entangled together. A gust of wind came from inside and blew away the smoke and haze. An elegant cultivator wearing a black robe and a tall hat appeared. The blood-red high cloud above his head was originally one, but as he walked down from the cloud, it slowly spread out. 1 turned into 2, 2 turned into 3. He stopped 1,000 feet away from Zhang Yan. He cupped his hands and said, "Spiritual Master Zhang, Blood Soul Sex Gao Rong greets you." Zhang Yan saw that this person was a Yuanying second-grade cultivator. However, there was not a hint of panic in his expression. He was still calm and composed as if he didn't take it seriously. He cupped his hands and returned the greeting, "Spiritual Master Gao greets you." Gao Ruang's eyes shone with a strange light. He thought to himself, this Zhang Yan achieved the first grade of Dan back then. His mana is really strong. When I tested him just now, even though my cultivation is higher than his, seriously speaking, my mana can't suppress his. I wonder where this person from Shenmen came from. Other than third-grade cultivators, I rarely meet an opponent. Today, I will have a good fight. In Feng Haiyang's arrangement, he wanted him to think of a way to delay Zhang Yan and wait for him to come back and attack together. However, the other disciples needed to give him face, but he didn't need to care. Whether it was seniority, age, or age of entering Dao, he and Feng Haiyang were almost the same. Therefore, he didn't care about what Feng Haiyang said. Gao Ruang let out a low laugh. Suddenly, he turned into a blood-colored beam of light and flew up into the sky. Then, he turned into hundreds of blood-colored beams of light that scattered in all directions. It was impossible to tell which one was his real body and which one was his blood soul. This escape technique of his was called the blood transformation escape technique. Not only was it faster than a meteor or a bolt of lightning when it soared, it was even more remarkable that every single blood soul could be sacrificed and flown with a similar speed, causing the enemy to be utterly unable to figure out where the master of the technique was. This escape technique, along with the underworld escape technique of the netherworld sect and the 9 wounds hidden smoke escape technique of the hunching sect, were the 3 great escape techniques of the evil path. It was extremely difficult to practice. Among the Yuanying disciples of the Xueshua sect, he was the only one who was the most proficient in this technique. Zhang Yan looked at the blood spirits dancing in the sky. His eyes flashed and he summoned his flying sword. A clear light flew into the sky. With a slight tremble, it turned into 32 sword lights. They shone brightly and flew in all directions in pursuit of the blood spirits. His sword lights were extremely sharp and fast. Every time he caught up to a blood spirit, he would slash it in half. However, after a round of fierce attacks, he found that the number of blood spirits didn't change. There were still hundreds of bloody lights circling around him. They were sometimes far and sometimes close, and they kept whistling. Gao Ruang sneered to himself. These blood spirits were refined by him. There was a large number of them. Not to mention that it was difficult to kill them. Even if he killed one, he could split another one. If he thought that he could rely on this to exhaust his Fa Li, then he was wrong. In the past, when he fought with others, He would often use this technique to force his opponent to a place where they didn't dare to move rashly. When the enemy's spirit was exhausted or when they couldn't help but rush to kill, he would find an opening to attack and kill the enemy in one move. After killing a few blood spirits, Zhang Yan saw that Gao Ruang didn't seem to care and didn't deliberately dodge, so he guessed that the damage would be limited. If this method didn't work, then he would use another method. With a thought, he stomped his feet. Immediately, waves surged, and within a mile radius, there were waves of water. Gao Ruang's pupils shrank. When he was in Chengyuan Gorge, he had carefully observed this great enemy and knew that he had a Dao technique. When it was used, there was light and the sound of waves, as if it could contain all things. If it were to attack at this moment, it would only need one sweep to collect all the blood souls here. It was a great threat to him, so he had to be extra vigilant. At this moment, when he saw the water light appear, he gave a command in his heart and all the blood souls immediately retreated in all directions. He was very clear that no matter how powerful a Dao technique was, if it couldn't hit the enemy, then it was useless. It was just a waste of Fa Li, so he just needed to be careful. However, just as he was thinking about this, he saw that the light had only risen a little, but then it retracted. He thought to himself, Zhang Yan is smart, he didn't use this Dao technique to its fullest. He only used force to avoid wasting his Fa Li. But if he only used this method, he would only be seeking stability, he wouldn't be able to defeat me. He laughed coldly in his heart and ordered all the blood spirits to close in again. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he scanned back and forth. Since the start of the battle, he had been observing carefully. He had also seen Gao Ruang fight with the disciples of Huanjin Temple. At that time, he had noticed that although there were many blood spirits, they didn't have their own consciousness. They were like puppets, controlled by others, and there was a pattern to their actions. Thinking about it, even though there was a saying in the path of evil that there were thousands of souls, but how could the Yuanian cultivators have this ability? Therefore, he could be sure that as long as the main person was hiding, his actions would be different from usual. As expected, just now, as the blood spirits retreated and advanced, he had already noticed that one of them was different from the others. Although he felt that something was wrong, he still didn't make a sound. This could be a bait that Gao Ruang purposely put out. Therefore, he didn't move and only used his sword gleam to secretly lock onto the blood spirit. When it got close, he would use the water element light to force it to retreat, and when it hid, he would then retract the water light. After this happened 2 or 3 times, he'd already confirmed his thoughts. When the enemy pressed forward once more, Chen Shi suddenly shouted loudly, and a peerlessly sharp sword light shot out. Swish! The sword light pierced through the enemy's body. Chapter 579. When the sword light slashed over, Gao Ruang was caught off guard. He didn't expect Zhang Yan to be able to pinpoint his location among the hundreds of blood spirits. Luckily, he cherished his life more than anyone else. When he was fighting with Qin Qingping from Ana Temple, he didn't even expose his true body. He paid special attention to his own defense, and he had 3 life-protecting blood banners on him. When the sword light slashed down, the blood banners were activated in time and he hid within them. He used the flag as a substitute for death and escaped. His reaction was extremely fast. Without waiting for the sword light to turn around and slash at him again, he had already escaped from the banners. His body shook and turned into a dozen blood spirits that scattered in all directions. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He sharply noticed that although Gao Ruang reacted in time, he was in a sorry state when he dodged. He didn't create many blood spirits in his haste. This was a great opportunity for him to chase after him with his sword and attack fiercely. Thus, he waved his sleeves, and a dozen bolts of purple cloud divine lightning struck at each of the blood spirits. A series of thunderous sounds rang out, and the dozen blood spirits were blown up in the air. Only one of them suddenly dodged to the side, and it was obvious that it was where its true body was. Zhang Yan recognized where the true body was, and his eyes became sharper. The sword pill moved according to his thoughts, and it turned into a rainbow as it flew over in an instant. When experts fought, life and death could be decided in a split second. Gao Ruang knew that he had made a mistake and revealed a flaw. Now he would have to face Zhang Yan's storm-like attacks. If he made even the slightest mistake, then he would definitely be defeated and killed. So, he immediately let out a loud shout and used all his strength to speed up the escape light. The blood-red light in the sky actually flew over 100 zhang away, and actually managed to reach a distance of 1,000 zhang away before the sword light arrived. Zhang Yan shouted and merged with his sword. He turned into a rainbow and flew up. In just a moment, he had already caught up to Gao Ruang. Gao Ruang didn't wait for him to slash. He repeated his old trick. His body trembled, and he turned into a dozen blood spirits that fled in different directions. Suddenly, there was a loud thunder in the sky, and most of the blood spirits were blown away. Only one of them flashed over, and it looked towards the north. Zhang Yan's mind raced. Based on the current situation, he would have to spend a few hours to sharpen his skills. He knew that he would not be able to kill this person, and in the end, he would have used up a lot of Fa. If another enemy appeared, it would be difficult to deal with. Thus, he withdrew his sword light and did not pursue. He thought to himself, this person isn't slow either. He's not much slower than me. He also has the blood clone to confuse the senses. If he didn't have the heaven and earth lock technique, I would have the upper hand. Looks like I can only lure it over and try using that move. Gao Ruang escaped from the sword light and flew for several miles. When he was far away in the sky, he stopped and made a hand sign. More than 100 blood souls appeared around him. Only then did he calm down. Thinking back to the situation just now, he felt a lingering fear. He thought to himself, this Zhang Yan's Fa Li is similar to mine, and his movement technique is better than mine. Since I can't gain an advantage in these two areas, then I can only try to win in terms of Dao techniques. When cultivators fought with their enemies, they would play to their strengths and avoid their weaknesses. He felt that with his hundreds of years of cultivation, in terms of using spells, he would be able to suppress Zhang Yan. He took out a pale white shield from his sleeves. It was slightly thinner in the middle, and the two ends were wide. There was an evil ghost face on it, and the face sometimes cried and sometimes laughed, like it was alive. He pointed at it, and the ghost head on the shield gave out a shrill cry, begging for mercy. Gao Ruang laughed coldly and took out the shield in the air. Immediately, a pale white mist fell down and covered his body. This talisman was called the Corpse Skin Smiling Face Shield. It was a Xian weapon given to him by the elders of his sect. It was originally made from the skin of more than 1,000 cultivators and refined with the secret technique of the Blood Soul sect. Thus, it was extremely fierce. Every time he used it, he had to teach it a lesson to make it obedient. Thus, he rarely used it. Now that he was going to compete with Zhang Yan in terms of spells, he took it out to protect himself. After he was done, he waved his sleeves and rode the wind forward. Zhang Yan had the same idea as Gao Rong, so he didn't force him. He first kept the sword light beside him, and with a thought, a golden light appeared. The heaven and earth leaf flew out and hovered above his head. He also stepped on the cloud and floated forward. The two of them approached each other slowly. Not long after, they were within 100 feet of each other and both stopped. Gao Ruang focused his gaze and saw that the cloud above Zhang Yan's head was glowing with 5 colors, and the water under his feet was glistening, rippling and flashing, as if it would turn into a stormy sea in the next moment. He thought to himself, if I want to take this person down, I have to break this technique first. Most of his offensive spells were based on the blood souls, but the existence of the water was an obstacle in front of him. Thus, he had to find a way to solve it first. With a thought, dozens of blood souls shot out from his side like arrows, all of them pouncing towards Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan didn't dodge and commanded the sword light to fly over, killing more than 10 blood souls in a row. There were only 3 or 4 fish that escaped the net, and they were still rushing inside. Suddenly, there was the sound of waves, and before they could get within 100 feet, they were swept away by the water element True Light. Gao Ruang saw that he was heavily guarded, and the door was extremely tight. His expression became solemn, and he silently observed. The blood souls that were absorbed into the blood souls only sensed a little, and after a short while, they were completely cut off from his mind. At this time, he knew that when the blood souls were absorbed, Zhang Yan couldn't kill them immediately and needed some time to dissolve them. He thought to himself, with Zhang Yan's mana, this technique must have a limit, and I need to use a secret technique to break it. The techniques of the Blood Soul sect were divided into upper, middle, and lower methods. The lower method couldn't capture demonic cultivators and refine them into blood souls. The lower method could only devour flesh, bones, skin, and blood, and it seemed that the lower generation cultivators were all like this. The middle method could refine the blood souls according to one's own thoughts, and use them for all kinds of unimaginable purposes. As for the upper method, it broke away from this path, and it was no longer restricted by these external objects. It only needed to use mana, and it could give birth to blood souls. Moreover, it would be compatible with one's own soul, and it could gather and disperse at will. At this stage, if all the blood souls were not destroyed, it would be impossible to kill them. That was why when Jinren Ru Huang wreaked havoc in Donghua, he needed 6 grotto heavens to surround and attack him. Gao Ruang was in the second realm of Yuanying, and only then did he get the middle method, and he could carry thousands of blood souls. Many of them were refined by him, and they had some magical uses. After thinking about it a few times, he came up with a plan to deal with the enemy. While he was thinking, Zhang Yan didn't just sit around, but he was circulating his technique, and his qi gathered above his head. He gradually moved the high cloud, and he was ready to go. This time, he didn't plan to use the flying sword as the main attack. Otherwise, even if he had the upper hand, it would just be a repeat of the stalemate just now. This was not what he wanted, so this time, he prepared to fight head-on with his supernatural powers. Gao Ruang made a gesture, and the 3 high cloud above his head suddenly trembled. Countless balls of light red smoke shot out, and when they reached far away, they all shattered and turned into scarlet clouds that floated in all directions. They were all the size of bowls, and just by looking, there were tens of thousands of them. With the 2 of them as the center, the 5 miles radius was filled with these things. Of course, Zhang Yan wouldn't allow him to lay out his spells so easily. He made a hand seal and cast a spell. As the high cloud trembled, several bolts of lightning flashed through the sky, traversing a distance of 1,000 feet and striking toward the great enemy in front of him. At the same time, he waved his sleeve, and 100 bolts of strong thunder were released to disperse the colorful clouds. At this moment, there was a flying mountain that floated into the battlefield, and after being struck by his strong thunder, half of the mountain collapsed, and the sound was loud. Gao Ruang saw that there weren't many bolts of lightning, so he decided not to dodge. He shook his shoulder lightly, and with a boom, hundreds of purplish-red blood spirits flew out, and split into 2 groups, and flanked from the side. As soon as he finished doing this, he heard a few explosions on the human skin shield, and the grayish-white fog that covered him seemed to be breaking apart. He couldn't help but be shocked. The power of the purple heaven thunder was much greater than he had imagined. Luckily, it was only a few bolts. If dozens of bolts were to strike at him at the same time, he would have to think of a way to avoid it. The sword pill beside Zhang Yan sensed the threat, and with a sword sound, it went up to meet the attack. Under Gao Ruang's control, the blood spirits split again, and 30 blood spirits flew out, and took the initiative to meet the sword pill. When the sword gleam hit it, it was like hitting metal, and it made a clanging sound, but it couldn't be broken in one hit. With this cover, the purplish-red blood spirits were no longer blocked in front of them, and they pounced forward. When they were just 100 feet away, they saw waves rolling in front of them as if they were hitting the shore, and just by rushing up, they drowned all the blood spirits that were attacking. These hundreds of blood spirits were fused with the blood poison technique, and not only did this poison have the ability to pollute spiritual vigor, every bit of poison aura was as heavy as lead. It was originally refined by Gao Ruang to deal with the Xianmen magical treasure, but now it was used by him to deal with the water element true light. Gao Ruang stared at it intently. Actually, he didn't have full confidence in this move, and he had already thought about it. If this method didn't work, then he could only completely give up on the idea of defeating this person and use his escape technique to deal with him. After dragging it out for a few hours, he would wait for Feng Haiyang to arrive, and then attack together. His eyesight was considered good, and he realized that after absorbing the blood spirits, the water light seemed to have slowed down a little. Although it wasn't obvious, it was obviously useful. He couldn't help but feel happy, and knew that his judgment was not wrong. He secretly sneered, "You can easily take a few tens of blood spirits, but what about 100 or 1,000? Even if Zhang Yan's Dao technique was strange, and it was not afraid of polluted spiritual qi, but once there were a lot of blood spirits, it would not be easy to suppress them. When the time came, he could use his best Dao technique to kill his opponent." Thinking about this, Gao Ruowang's spirit doubled, and his movements were not slow. First, he drove the surrounding colorful clouds to the center, and then he continuously sent out blood spirits, and occasionally threw out Yin thunder, and started to attack Zhang Yan. Because he was afraid that Zhang Yan would see through his plan, he didn't dare to send out too many at once, but at least a dozen, and at most 100. Fortunately, Zhang Yan seemed to be unaware of it, and no matter how many blood spirits came, as long as the sword net could not block them, he would use the water element true light to collect them all. After a moment, Gao Ruong had already thrown more than 1,000 blood souls into it. When he looked at it again, even though the torrential tide was still powerful, it was already a little sluggish. It was as if it had been mixed with millions of tons of sand and mud, and it was a little motionless. Chapter 580. Just now, while Gao Ruowang was attacking fiercely, Zhang Yan had already used the water light as a cover to secretly split the 20 sword lights out. They hid far away behind the flying peaks that filled the sky, waiting for an opportunity to attack. This technique was created by him based on the heaven and earth sealing technique of the third-grade Yuanying cultivators. The strength of this technique was that it used the speed of the sword lights. If a cultivator tried to escape, as long as he was blocked by a sword light, all the sword lights would attack him from all directions, making it impossible for him to hide. However, this technique was after all sealed with sword lights, so there were still many flaws. It did not really seal the heaven and earth. If the opponent had a treasure to protect himself, he might be able to break out by paying a small price. Just now, Zhang Yan saw that Gao Ruong dodged his own sword light slash. It was very mysterious, and it was obvious that his protection technique was extraordinary. Thus, he pondered and felt that the only way was to break this technique before he could attack again. Gao Ruong tried to break his water element true light a few times. After some serious consideration, Zhang Yan decided to beat him at his own game. He stopped using this Taoist technique and found a way to lure Gao Ruong to take the bait. Gao Ruong saw that the water light had already slowed down, but he was still secretly vigilant. He was not in a hurry to rush forward, but with a shake of his body, dozens of blood souls went forward to test it. A thought arose in Zhang Yan's mind, and the sword orb flew over in response. A horizontal light flashed, and with a flash, it slashed more than half of the blood souls that assaulted him into pieces. The remaining blood souls collided with the golden curtain of light of the universe leaf and shattered into pieces, unable to be shaken in the slightest. These blood souls were only ordinary. If they were like the ones from before, which could pollute magic treasures, he would not use the heaven and earth leaf to block them. He would most likely use the purple heaven thunder. The two of them fought for a while. Zhang Yan saw that Gao Ruong was still patrolling outside and did not use his trump card. He could not help but secretly nod. This person was worthy of being a disciple of the devil's doctrine. He was actually able to hold back and not make a move at this moment. He was indeed not simple. He changed his mind and realized that he couldn't just be on the defensive all the time. This would easily arouse the opponent's suspicions, so he had to find a way to force the opponent. As soon as this thought crossed his mind, he activated his Xian Qi and a yellow light shot out from the high cloud above his head. Suddenly, it transformed into a large Xian Huang hand and rose up with a rumbling sound. After a distance of 10,000 feet, the 5 fingers closed and grabbed a piece of rock and threw it down. This mountain was at least 100 zhang tall, and it was also a colossus. When the dozens of blood souls smashed into it, they only caused the grass and trees to wither and the flowers and trees to wither. However, it was useless against the sturdy mountain and hard rocks. They had no choice but to scatter to the left and right. Gao Ruang was startled. He sneered and also used a spell. A blood-red hand appeared above his head and slapped the mountain back. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and immediately, several thunderbolts burst out. How could this flying mountain withstand such a Dao technique? It immediately collapsed into countless gravel and mud and drifted in all directions. The large Xian Huang hand above his head did not stop. It slapped in the air and slapped another flying mountain. The flying mountains here were thousands of feet wide, and the small ones were tens of zhang. He did not know how many there were. With a wave of his hand, one of them flew away. In just a moment, there were more than 10 mountains that crashed into the opposite side. If there were more mountains, although Gao Rong was not afraid, it would be troublesome to sweep them up. He did not want to waste his Fa Li for nothing, so he used his escape technique to dodge. Zhang Yan took out a porcelain bottle from his sleeve and pulled out the stopper. He threw it into the water light under his feet. No one knew what he threw in. While Gao Ruang was flying, he saw his actions. He could not help but be shocked. He immediately guessed that this was Zhang Yan trying to break his thousands of blood spirits so that the water light could be used again. He initially thought that even if Zhang Yan had a way to break the blood spirits, as long as he maintained the attack, he would not be able to free himself. However, at this moment, it seemed that Zhang Yan had another secret treasure with him. He thought to himself, I still want to test a few more times, but it's too late now. Forget it, at this point, if I don't make a move, all my previous efforts will be in vain. Thinking of this, he did not hesitate anymore. He turned his palm and a long nail that was condensed from gray smoke was secretly held in his hand. This treasure was called the 7-Ju heart-piercing nail. He abandoned his own protective treasure light and used the spiritual opportunity. He then used a magical weapon as a support and refined it with the baleful Een demonic poison. This thing had a form but no substance. It was unusually sharp, and ordinary magic weapons would not be able to resist it. If a cultivator was hit by it, he would die instantly. It was not without reason that he was afraid of the water element true light. Although this treasure was powerful, it had a flaw. It needed to borrow the hands of the blood spirits to use it. Moreover, the speed of this nail was relatively slow. If the distance was too far, it would be very easy for the opponent to avoid it. Only when the distance was more than 200 feet would he have the confidence to stab the opponent. However, this was not enough. Gao Ruang's eyes sharpened. In order to ensure that this attack would be foolproof, he decided to use himself as a bait to trick Zhang Yan to make a move. At that time, he would have the confidence to use this treasure. He waved his sleeves and leaped into a conveyance light, rushing towards Zhang Yan. When he was within 100 feet, he saw that there was a sword light coming up to block him. He immediately shook his body and transformed into 100 blood spirits. They drilled into the sword net and broke into the inner circle. He hid the heart-piercing nail in his sleeve and hid outside, waiting for an opportunity. Seeing that Gao Ruang took the initiative to come up, Zhang Yan would not miss this opportunity no matter whether he was playing tricks or not. His eyes were suddenly filled with killing intent. He turned his Xian Qi and the high cloud above his head shook. 2 lights, one red and one gold, flew out at the same time. Seeing him attack, Gao Ruang shouted loudly. He didn't dodge the 2 rays of true light that attacked him, and with a flick of his sleeve, he tossed it forward. A slender gray nail flew out of his hand, and it only flew a few meters before it suddenly disappeared. When it appeared again, it actually flew out from the body of a blood soul in front of him. With a poof, it pierced through the golden curtain of the heaven and earth leaf and directly pierced into Zhang Yan's chest. With another sound of silk ripping, it exploded into a mist of blood that filled the sky. At this moment, the blood banner in Gao Ruang's bosom sensed danger and flashed, bringing him inside. The 2 lights flew over. First, the red light struck down and tore apart the layer of gray barrier of the human skin smiling face shield like it was paper. Then, with a flash of golden light, the blood banner was cut in half. When the 2 lights disappeared, the blood banner suddenly closed and shook. Gao Ruang escaped from it again. He looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't help but show joy in his eyes. Although he had once again sacrificed the death substitution technique, it was worth it to be able to kill a great enemy like Zhang Yan. He had always been cautious. At this moment, although he thought that he had won against Zhang Yan, he still used his magic treasures to protect himself. However, when cultivators fought, even if they had treasures to protect themselves, if they were careless, they could fall into a life-threatening situation. Just as he was slightly distracted, a brilliant spiritual light suddenly flew over and arrived in front of him in an instant. This thing was like a spiritual carp and pecked at the human skin smiling face shield. It instantly pierced a hole, and the treasure let out a cry. Its spiritual light had already leaked out and it fell from the sky. Not good. Gao Ruang's expression changed greatly. How could he not know that Zhang Yan had not been killed? At this moment, the situation was extremely disadvantageous to him. He hurriedly used the blood transformation escape technique to escape. However, he had only gone a few feet away when he saw more than 20 sword lights coming from all directions. They surrounded him and sealed off all his escape routes. Gao Ruang's face twitched. He turned around and took the initiative to escape into the blood banner. The sword lights arrived in an instant and slashed inside, tearing the blood light into pieces. After more than 20 sword lights slashed, they each flew forward a few dozen feet. They were still in the same encirclement as before. Then, the sword lights turned around to attack again. Gao Ruang's last technique to protect his life was destroyed and he had also lost his defensive profound weapon. He was at the end of his rope. With no other choice, he fiercely clenched his teeth and shook his body to shake off a ball of cloud from the top of his head, transforming it into a ray of spiritual light to protect his body. Then he activated his escape technique and actually forcefully broke through the sword net's blockade. Zhang Yan sneered and flicked his finger. The Xinming heavy water flew out and smashed into Gao Ruang's chest. He screamed and fell from the sky, landing on a flying peak. Zhang Yan looked down and waved his hand. As his sleeves fluttered, a large ball of muddy yellow qi immediately flew down with the wind. At this moment, Gao Ruang's sternum was broken and he had no strength to dodge. Seeing that the Dao technique was strange, he could not see through it. He could only forcefully use his Fa Li. With a low roar, he shook off the cloud above his head and turned it into a red light mist to protect his body. However, to his surprise, this muddy yellow gas did not have the earth-shattering power he had imagined. When it came into contact with the blood mist, his expression could not help but become absent-minded. His whole body suddenly disappeared from where he stood. Zhang Yan knew that the Blood Soul sect had various secret techniques that were impossible to guard against. As long as there was a slight mistake, it was very likely that this person would escape. Seeing that Gao Ruang had landed on the flying peak, he used the earth escape technique to escape into the peak. Although with this person's Fa Li, it would not take long for him to break out of the ground. However, with him here, how could it be so easy to let him out? With a clear shout, the earth element true light was released from the cloud. It was 100 feet long and instantly swept the entire flying peak. This light had the effect of solidifying the soil like steel. With one sweep, the soil under this side of the peak immediately turned as hard as steel. When Gao Ruang came back to his senses, he found that he was actually deep in the soil. Although this place could not hurt him, he was afraid that Zhang Yan had a backup plan. He quickly used the blood transformation escape technique. His body turned into a scarlet-red escape light and rushed out from the inside. Not long after, he broke through the soil and saw the sky. However, halfway out, the soil beside him suddenly condensed and became incomparably hard. Immediately, his body stiffened and he was unable to move. At this moment, the upper half of his body was already exposed, but the lower half of his body was stuck under the flying peak. This situation immediately caused his face to turn pale. He could be considered to have made a prompt decision. He knew that staying here would undoubtedly lead to death. He hurriedly used a secret technique, wanting to use his origin spirit to wrap all the blood essence in his body and escape. However, Just as he used the technique, a sword light had already killed him horizontally. With a crack, it struck his head. The head was still in the air when suddenly its eyes rolled up. A blood light rushed out from the top of the head. Before it could go into the clouds, the sound of waves rose, and with a flash of water, it had already been drawn in. Zhang Yan flicked his big sleeve and slowly landed on the peak. He raised his eyes and calmly looked into the distant sky. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.